Chapter 344. The world of ice and snow kept expanding. The snow-white horizon kept extending. As far as the eye could see, the entire world was covered in white. Normally, when two soul worlds collided, it would depend on the strength of the soul world and the user's power. If there wasn't too much of a difference, then each soul world would occupy half of the soul world. And if one side was overwhelmingly stronger, then the weaker side's soul world would only be able to protect themselves. But for us, there wouldn't be any difference. At the very least, there wouldn't be any difference in appearance. What color would it be if white and white overlap? As far as Zero could see, there was still snow everywhere. What surprised Zero was that the two ice archmages' soul worlds didn't clash with each other at all. They perfectly merged together. This obviously went against the common sense of soul worlds. While she was astonished, she also faintly sensed that something was wrong with the situation. The double coldness caused the temperature to plummet yet again. This extreme coldness caused snow to fall from the sky once again. The palm-sized snowflakes were actually ice crystals. Fatal frost would freeze the ground as it smashed into the ground. It was just like an explosion of snow. But the first to be unable to bear it were Zero's personal guards, who were already used to the cold. Logically speaking, they should have long since gotten used to the cold since they came from the ice plane. But the strange thing was that in this relatively warm mortal plane, the seemingly harmless ice made them feel quite uncomfortable. The intelligent high-level undead discovered to their astonishment that the situation had already gone out of control. Their feet were now unable to move when they touched the snow. They had lost control of their limbs, and the endless snowflakes caused the high-level undead's soul vision to become meaningless. In this soul world created by two undead emperors, even the legend-ranked undead were as powerless as mortals. The darkness and coldness created a hopeless situation of death. It wasn't a coincidence that they chose to use a large-scale AoE attack like a soul world. It was because of the nature of ice magic. After all, no matter if it was stealing heat or regular ice magic, both would cause a large-scale change in temperature. In that case, in order to maximize the attack's power, many top-level ice archmages would choose to use a soul world of ice. A low-temperature soul world of ice and snow wouldn't weaken the power of ice magic. Instead, it would strengthen the power of ice magic. This was the same principle for fire archmages. Many fire archmages' soul worlds would be lava or volcanoes, which would multiply the power of their attacks. It was completely reasonable for two top-tier ice mages to have similar soul worlds, but it was very abnormal for their soul worlds to overlap with each other. However, I chuckled. This abnormality was exactly what I wanted. I watched as large amounts of ice and snow descended. The hibernation chill contained within the ice and snow made even the strongest undead feel as if they were prey trapped in a spider's web. Struggling would be meaningless, and they could only obediently be frozen. The ones who couldn't understand the current situation the most were the winter devils. They were completely immune to ice, but this was the first time they had experienced the pain of being frozen. This ice and snow actually made them feel despair. When the extreme ice arrived, they discovered that they could actually still feel pain. The extreme cold caused their skin to crack, their bones to shatter, and their souls to freeze. The ice that they had never experienced before was directly damaging their very essence, causing them to recall the pain they felt when they were still alive. Gradually, when the pain gradually weakened and even disappeared, it wasn't that their physical bodies were finally able to resist this extreme cold. Instead, they had completely lost their limbs and souls. Why did it coordinate with me to increase the power of my ice domain? Then aren't you a living being? Zero didn't hide her astonishment at all. She discovered that Roland wasn't resisting her heat loss pond at all. Instead, he added something to it that greatly increased its power. Was Roland not worried that he would die in there as well? Wasn't he a living being? He even dared to increase the power of my soul world? Wasn't he afraid that I wouldn't be able to endure it first? Logically speaking, when it came to ice magic, the living would be far inferior to the undead, who weren't afraid of low temperatures. After all, many ice magic spells had large AoE effect. It would be a joke if you accidentally froze yourself to death. For undead ice magic, all you needed to do was lower the temperature, and the living would naturally die in large numbers. This was also why many liches would study ice magic as well. However, Roland was clearly a living being, yet he placed himself in an extremely cold environment. Even though this ice was capable of freezing even a winter demon, he still didn't stop increasing the power of his soul world. Was he trying to commit suicide? Of course, I had no intentions of explaining myself to Zero, nor would I tell her that my absolute zero ice armor made the lower temperature meaningless. Nor would I tell her that I wasn't using a soul world, but rather a true frigid winter earth from another world. I didn't increase the power of my soul world. Instead, I placed my soul world within my frigid winter earth. Is it fine to just comment in my heart? I heard everything. Of course. Otherwise, how uncomfortable would it be to hold it in? Besides, it's not like Roland can hear me. I wasn't some brainless villain who would die from talking too much, nor was I some demon king who loved explaining things. How could I possibly tell my secrets to Roland? I even marked my weaknesses and treasures in red, as if I was afraid that Roland wouldn't be able to find a way to deal with me. If Roland was confused, then so be it. It would be even better if he died without even realizing it. However, the closest undead creature was already right in front of me. Even if I was slowed down, I still couldn't ignore it. And since Roland's soul world was still in a disconnected state, then, come out, Irene Bela. As expected, nothing good will come out of calling me. A gigantic ice dragon arrived with the wind. However, I secretly applied a layer of my patented absolute zero ice armor on its outer shell. This was the only way I wouldn't be turned into an ice sculpture by this deadly snowstorm. Temperature control. No matter if it was high temperature or low temperature magic, the greatest advantage or disadvantage would always be its outstanding area of effect. Not only would I obtain an outstanding AoE attack, but the most likely cause of death would also be accidentally killing myself. After all, the temperature would change without a trace. It was highly possible that I would be roasted to death or frozen to death. That was why I was an ice mage who wasn't very confident in my control over ice. After I obtained my own world of ice and snow and gained control over the power of the concept, the first thing I did was create a shield of ice to protect myself. This armor created from the coldest ice would allow me to suffer a certain amount of frostbite, but also prevent me from dying at even lower temperatures. As my opponent, Zero wasn't that easy to deal with. She was a true blue semi-god undead emperor. Perhaps she wasn't in her strongest form right now, which meant that she was probably only at the myth rank. That meant that she was an ice mage who was 2 major power levels higher than me. As expected, direct attacks are meaningless? I had no intentions of directly fighting against her. Instead, I had my frigid winter earth increase the temperature of her soul world. However, the result was that her subordinates were indeed affected. She basically ignored the snowflakes as they directly floated past her. Since she didn't hit her, even my freezing air wouldn't affect her at all. When I close my eyes, I can sense nothing at all. It's as if she doesn't even exist. Is this what Zero is like? Indeed, specters didn't have physical bodies. The strongest among them were even immune to physical damage. However, this definitely didn't mean that they were immune to magic. I knew quite well what soul worlds were like. While it was possible to create an environment that allowed one to use their strengths, it was impossible to directly create a cheat-like setting. This meant that her ability to ignore my freezing air was most likely a unique ability of hers. I had also tested this ability in battle. No matter if it was rocks or magic, they would all directly pass through her, making it impossible for her to cause any actual damage. However, ever since we met, apart from summoning her soul world and summoning her subordinates, she hadn't done anything else. It was evident that her invincibility didn't come without a price. While specters were immune to physical damage, they also had no physical attack abilities. Since they didn't have physical bodies, they wouldn't even be able to pick up ordinary weapons. They could only use their negative energy bodies to touch the living and instinctively absorb their life force. Perhaps Zero's current state was similar to this. It wasn't that she didn't want to attack, it was that she was unable to. Against ordinary opponents, perhaps just stealing away the surrounding temperature would be sufficient. The ice dragon before me was flying amidst the snowflakes. Streaks of dragon breath were preventing the slow-moving undead from approaching me. Since magical pets couldn't surpass their masters in power level, this seemingly powerful ice dragon was actually only at the peak of gold rank. She could only count as an embroidered pillow. Fine then, judging from the dragon breath that suddenly shot towards me, Irene Bela was quite dissatisfied with me. Although I've already set up the trap, it seems that it'll still take some time for this ticking time bomb to explode. In that case, I'll have War play with you. Just what form was War in? What form should he take? What abilities did he have? Would he be vicious? How would I know? Is there any parent who can know their child's abilities, appearance, and occupation before they're even born? So-called parents would probably only be able to provide their child with the most basic physical body and an environment to grow up in. At most, they would give their child a name with some meaning. War, you called for me? A voice suddenly spoke up from behind me. It would seem that he had finished the final reorganization. He had a mature male voice, a tall and straight figure, and a smile on his face, making him seem just like a mature gentleman. It wasn't strange at all for him to have such an appearance since he had obtained sufficient knowledge from nutrition products the moment he was born. A good child actually appeared. Is it true that great constructions create miracles? After investing so many resources, a normal person finally appeared. Do you see how polite he is? He's a good child, a true gentleman. I'm not the type of person who specializes in creating freaks. A gentleman who doesn't have a face and still wears a skirt? Don't remind me. Can't you at least let me enjoy myself for a minute? It was evident that this child's mental state was still rather chaotic. He was simultaneously wearing a gentleman's clothing and skirt, and there was nothing on his face that should have a face. This is probably a problem with having a collective consciousness. Too many individuals gather into a single soul. Appearance, gender, body, and so on are all unknown, which is why he has such a chaotic appearance. Harloise, who was reliable for once, gave me the same answer. She was also quite interested in our creation. At the same time that I was facing this war, in the battle between the twin dragons, the battle between the Titans and the dwarves, and the battle between the Titans and the Gays, a similarly indistinguishable existence appeared. This existence seemed to be male, yet female, like a human, yet not human. It seemed to exist, yet not exist. Yes, Mother is correct. Percent and asterisk. Mother? Alright, from a certain standpoint, she was correct. Harloise had personally done most of the work. However, the silly cat was currently sending me a bunch of random numbers, which doubtlessly meant that her emotions were so complex that they couldn't be described with words. Then, according to Father's wishes, I shall display my abilities. Father, please remember that War has no fixed form. When War made his decision, the communication in human form lost its meaning. Soon, he turned back into a phantom image. In front of us, the mountain range kept shaking. Then, the ground split open, and a gigantic skeletal hand reached out from the ground. Right after that, a bone giant as large as a mountain appeared. He opened his mouth wide, and countless souls gathered in a black hole that spun in his mouth. His green eyes had an evil glint that could instantly kill the undead. If one looked closely, they would discover that this bone giant's bones were actually the combination of countless skeleton soldiers, liches, skeleton warhorses, and so on. He was the combination of countless undead. Welcome your death. The bone giant began his own hunt. Zero's undead became his prey. Just touching them would cause them to become a part of his physical body. War's bone giant grew stronger and stronger as he fought. On the other battlefields, similar scenes were playing out. Currently, the undead barracks were completely empty, and the few survivors were frantically fleeing for their lives. On the battlefield where the two dragons were fighting, War had transformed into an army of undead archers and necromancers, shooting countless cursed bone arrows at Molly. On the battlefield between the Thunder Titan and the Dwarf War God, War transformed into a cavalry squad that charged at the gigantic bone giant. Perhaps they wouldn't be able to deal any fatal damage to the bone giant, but they would be able to effectively attract the berserk thunder and reduce some of the pressure on the Dwarf War God. And on the battlefield between the Titan Eans and the gay Dwarf War God, War transformed into a cavalry squad that charged at the gigantic bone giant. Perhaps they wouldn't be able to deal any fatal damage to the bone giant, but they would be able to effectively attract the berserk thunder and reduce some of the pressure on the Dwarf War God. Just as War said, he was the incarnation of war to begin with, and he didn't have a fixed form. Instead, he would choose the most suitable form for himself based on his opponent, and he would constantly evolve and grow in battle. One was missing? The battle between the goddess of wealth and the divine beast lion was missing? Actually, that battle had already ended. A certain saint-rank individual that had been hidden away as a secret weapon actually changed his lazy habits and volunteered to go to the most dangerous battlefield. And when he appeared and spoke to the lion for the first time, that battle was already destined to have no result. Cute little brother, may I ask if you've heard of me before? No? That's great, that's too bad. Hello, my name is Beifong Heralt, and I'm a beast tamer hunter. Perhaps we can become friends. Chapter 345. The snow didn't show any signs of stopping. However, these two top-level ice magic mages met the most troublesome opponent they had ever met in their lives. Both of them discovered to their astonishment that the attack methods they were so proud of were completely ineffective. Their opponent seemed to be completely immune to their attacks. War's incarnation of a giant was currently whipping the ground. His gigantic fists were as fast as lightning. He instantly pierced through Zero, but it was as if he had pierced through a mirage of the moon in the water. Everything in front of him trembled, and then he saw nothing. Not far away, another Zero appeared. Immune to physical attacks, the ice balls I tossed in midair exploded, and ice magic alls scattered everywhere. Some transformed into ice birds, some transformed into ice bridges, and there was even a reindeer pulling a sled, a white-bearded old man, and a naughty child chasing after me for presents. My foundational magic allowed me to freely release my imagination in midair. It was impossible for these living creatures to dodge my ice haste spells, but the result was the same as before. They directly pierced through without feeling like they hit anything at all. Immune to ice magic. No, judging from how my holy light balls have no effect either, she's immune to an even higher level of energy attacks. An ancient ghost dodged the ice dragons in midair. It seemed that Frigid Maw's unique soul attack was still effective against her. However, the tremendous difference in power level made it impossible for Irene Bela to catch up. But on the other hand, Zero could only watch as the bone giant on the ground did whatever it wanted on the battlefield. Zero's personal guards, which she had worked so hard to gather, had either turned into ice sculptures or were as slow as turtles. They could only serve as nourishment for the newborn undead. She shuttled through the air like a meteor, passing through circles of low-temperature zones. A large amount of ice and snow turned into a surging tidal wave of attacks, but it still couldn't break the thin ice armor. In such a nearly invincible state, she only has one method of attacking by changing her temperature. I was observing my opponent, and my opponent was also observing me. What Zero couldn't understand the most was that not only was her low-temperature magic ineffective against me, it was also ineffective against my summoned creatures. The duel between high-level spellcasters was just that boring and uninteresting. They would attack first, probe, defend, record, attack again, and probe again. They would gradually figure out the opponent's trump card, understand the composition and characteristics of the opponent's abilities, and search for the opponent's weakness. When all preparations were complete and they were certain that they would win, they would then attack and deal a fatal blow. Of course, such a situation would only occur between powerhouses of similar strength. Otherwise, once one figured out the other party's level, they could just use high-level magic to crush them. From this situation, I had more or less an idea. It was a known fact that the undead emperors had been exiled from the mortal plane. In such a situation, it was impossible for her to use her full power. In that case, she was currently an incarnation of some sort. Combining the fact that she seemed to exist and not exist, I came to a conclusion. This is a projection. According to the plane's confirmation, she's not even here. No one can attack someone who doesn't exist, so she can obtain near-invincible abilities. But as a price, the non-existent naturally can't launch targeted attack. She can only use her special heat plunder to create a low temperature and change the environment around the projection, but she can't attack. Roland, you're being underestimated. I was unable to counter Harlowe's words. She wanted to defeat me with a mere projection? It was obvious that she was underestimating me. But, looking at it from another angle, perhaps she was only here to collect information on me. Not only did her projection lack attack methods, her invincible abilities were also quite annoying. It was as if she was undefeatable from the very start. How could there possibly be true invincibility in this world? Allow me to tell my senior that times have changed. It's best not to use such outdated tricks. What should I do? Wait? She'll self-destruct if I wait? Yes. Do you really think that an undead emperor would self-destruct so easily? Or? Harloise was unable to finish her sentence, because Zero's projection in the sky suddenly trembled and fell down. Although she soon regained her balance, judging from her astonished and confused expression, she still didn't know why she had been attacked. Yet, that invisible attack had indeed existed, which confused her greatly. How did you do it? I have my own brilliant plan. Forget it, I won't explain any more. You won't understand even if I tell you. Impossible. I'm an omniscient existence. How could there be magic that I can't understand? Just what did you do? Have you received any high school education? Do you know about the law of conservation of energy? Do you have a high school diploma? An omniscient existence? I think you're an illiterate archmage. Don't bite me. Have you ever seen a sword that bites? Fine, I'll explain everything to you later. You should go work hard for now. Go, I'll choose you, Harloise. Pokeball. Harloise's magic sword tore through the sky. However, its target wasn't the ghosts in the sky. Instead, it was the myth-ranked winter demons that were struggling bitterly in war's hands. Existences of this level were capable of serving as an undead emperor's personal guards, so they definitely wouldn't be easy to obtain. Not even an undead emperor would be willing to sacrifice them for such a long time in such a desperate situation. As expected, Zero elegantly arced through the sky, creating a series of cold zones and countless icicles. Among the icicles, there were also various snowballs, snowy mountains, and other large ice blocks. It seemed that she discovered that low temperatures were ineffective, so she began using physical attacks. In order to increase her damage and make dodging more difficult, she even made these ice blocks into all sorts of strange shapes, but F***CK, this suddenly reminds me of a very old game. Whack-a-mole? This situation caused Harloise to have some bad associations, but it was evident that her guess was incorrect. Tetris. Alright then, since they were both smashing things from above, one depended on speed and reaction speed, while the other depended on how they were arranged. From the angle at which they were smashed, there wasn't much of a difference: circle, triangle, and cube? How are you supposed to put them together? Are you intending to force someone with OCD to death? That's enough. Nobody forced you to put them together. Even if you put them together, they won't disappear. System notification. Isn't my service very good? I'll deduct 5 comment points from you. Nobody wants you to comment. Even though it was quite difficult for me to dodge these heavy objects, I still revealed a victorious smile. That was because I noticed that Zero's expression was becoming worse and worse. It seemed that her backlash was becoming more and more severe. Backlash? Yep, I had already set up a trap for her the moment that I discovered that she was a heat energy thief. After such a long battle, it seemed that this trap had finally been triggered. Energy theft? Then where did the heat energy she stole go? That's so illogical. To be honest, I had never been able to understand where the heat energy thieves went. But sometimes, energy wouldn't be conserved, and the heat energy would mysteriously disappear. Obviously, this other world where magic existed was just that illogical. Perhaps I should say that it wasn't magic anymore, especially when it came to the various species' natural talent. Not even magical theories could explain them. In that case, at least in my world, let's make it more scientific. The frigid winter Earth was my world. Its natural laws were my understanding of the structure of the world. Here, I was able to create the coldest ice that was obviously not magic in the outside world. Naturally, I was also able to make something that wasn't magic become scientific. The conservation of energy was a basic concept that I could understand. Since Zero had entered this world, she would have to obey its basic laws. From the moment that I used frigid winter Earth to envelop her soul world of ice, she had already fallen into my trap. Based on this world's natural laws, she could still steal heat energy. However, it was impossible for heat energy to vanish into thin air. Based on the law of causality that Titan had mentioned, the karma that was planted would eventually be traced back to the cause. All heat energy would return to Zero's main body. How much heat energy you steal, how much you lower the temperature of the entire environment, you'll experience an equal amount of energy that's forced to a high temperature. This was the power of a concept. Perhaps it seemed incredibly weak, or even dangerous, to the point where it didn't differentiate between friend and foe, but once it touched the bottom line of the natural laws, it would give even the strongest of individuals a headache. The greatest problem with power at the level of natural laws was that they were unreasonable. Their priority was far greater than any other power derived from natural laws. However, their greatest threat was that they were reasonable. Everything would be fine as long as it didn't go against their logic, but as long as it didn't, it would be forcefully harmonized. As the only creator of this world, I was the only one who knew all the logic of this world. This was also why the two creator goddesses of order and chaos were basically undefeatable in the world of Aichi. Apart from their individual power levels being able to easily suppress their juniors, their ridiculously high administrator authority and administrator knowledge was also the reason why it felt like they were undefeatable. And right now I was the master of my world. Zero had already created countless icebergs and low-temperature environments. She kept creating large amounts of frost and snow. Who knew how many low-temperature zones she had created and how much heat she stole? It would have been fine if she had used normal ice and snow magic. After all, elemental composition was a fundamental law of this world. However, she used her natural talent of stealing low temperature. In that case, the heat she stole wouldn't suddenly vanish like it would in the outside world. She would enjoy the backlash of her own energy. That was why I wouldn't stop her soul world from becoming low temperature from the very start. In fact, I would even add fuel to the fire, allowing her unscientific natural talent ability to develop to the extreme. Perhaps her projection would seem fine since nobody would be able to harm non-existent matter. However, it was highly likely that her main body had already been ignited by the feedback of the heat without her even realizing it. And if the concept of karma was calculated, it would count as self-harm. How could self-harm be avoided? That was why her ability to not exist seemed to have finally lost its effectiveness. I didn't need to completely analyze how she was able to not exist. All I needed to do was use the power of dimensional laws to take advantage of her current state and make her suffer the consequences of her actions. Just what did you do? Zero's translucent ghost body actually began to melt. Her ancient dress showed signs of being burned. At the very least, at this moment, she received the strongest fear she had ever felt in her entire life. Her main body was actually attacked in the ice elemental plane. Not only that, she was the most afraid of high-temperature attacks. Not only that, even she was unable to resist such a high-temperature attack. I nodded and chuckled as I observed this situation. You want to know how I managed to attack your main body? Although she didn't reply, it was obvious that she was still confused and wanted me to explain from her expectant gaze. I'm not going to tell you. Don't look at me like that. It's not like I'm some villain who dies from talking too much. How could I possibly explain my trump cards? But I can tell you that if you don't want your main body to self-destruct, don't do anything else. Of course, I wasn't telling the truth, but I wasn't lying either. Actually, as long as she didn't use her ability to lower her temperature, she naturally wouldn't suffer any backlash. And now that I said something like that, no matter whether she believed me or not, it had already become a mental shackle that restricted her actions. Zero glared at me one last time, but her body became fainter and fainter. It seemed that she understood the situation and intended to dispel this projection so that her soul could return to her main body. But when she became transparent to a certain degree, she suddenly transformed back into a nearly physical ghost body. This time, there was a mysterious fear in her expression as she looked at me. It seemed that she had discovered that she was unable to leave. At the very least, this projection was unable to leave. Clap. I imitated Zero and clapped my hands, causing the snowstorm to suddenly disperse. Sunlight shone down from the clouds, revealing the true appearance of this frozen land. This was no longer a completely empty ice plain. In the icy ocean at the edge of my vision, I could see gigantic demon whales spitting out water pillars that were several dozen meters tall. Icebergs floated in the ocean, and not far away from us were endless mountain ranges. I could even faintly hear the roars of beasts. At the foot of the mountains there was a forest made of ice crystals. I could even faintly see buildings at the edge of my vision. This place was becoming more and more like a real world. You want to know why you can't leave? I'm not going to tell you. Leave this clone behind and then go wonder about it yourself. Right? Leave behind your essence, leave behind your knowledge. Otherwise, I'm going to use your projection clone to shoot XX videos and sell them to the fairies merchant company. I love it when my master's wife is pitiful. Silly cat, don't bite me. You're not my master's wife, you're my master. Silly cat, you won't be able to sell without pitiful things. Chapter 346. By the time I returned to the mortal plane from the frigid winter earth in satisfaction, the battle was already nearing its end. Due to the awakening of the battle, the undead army was treated as nourishment for the newborn. The last undead were devoured by the undead in large numbers, while the undead army committed mass suicide as if they had gone insane. This scared the living quite a bit. If it wasn't for Samantha telling me about the situation and the powerful individuals on the calamity rankings that she had hired to help everyone understand the situation, it was likely that the battle would have been even more chaotic. However, the battle definitely wasn't over yet, because the Titans are such headache-inducing existences. The difference between a true god and a semi-god was probably their control over the natural laws of the world. Although they had control over the natural laws of the world, they were also bound by the natural laws of the world. A semi-god that had lived long enough wouldn't necessarily be weaker than a true god, even if they didn't borrow the power of natural laws. However, even the weakest true god would be difficult to deal with due to the power of natural laws. Unfortunately, the true gods who weren't weak were currently being suppressed by the Titans, who were even stronger. Mary's current appearance wasn't as golden as she had been when she first appeared. Her entire body was charred black from the traces of lightning. As for the gay Solo, half of his body was frozen. It seemed that Eanes was indeed the ancestor of the frost giants. Apart from taming beasts, he also had the power of ice. I could understand the true god's weakness. After all, one was a god of art, while the other was a god of smithing. Neither was skilled in combat. Not to mention, the adult Titan giants would have countless years of combat experience. Still, as a god, it would be far too embarrassing to be beaten up by a Titan giant's incarnation in front of everyone. However, the turning point of the battle had already occurred. Due to certain unspeakable reasons, the goddess of wealth Baiana's battle ended earlier than expected. When she chose to help Mary, both of them were high-level existences incarnations. It would be ridiculous if both of them couldn't win. However, the Titan giant seemed to become more and more berserk as he fought. The sky was filled with the lightning he summoned, giving him the advantage. He should be able to win. This wasn't a guess. It was a judgment based on the current situation. Both sides were incarnations that were stuck at a bottleneck in the mortal plane. There wasn't much of a difference in power level. If the two true gods were forced into a corner, they could directly self-destruct their incarnations to teach the Titan giants a lesson. The battle between the two dragons at the city gate ended much faster than expected. Apart from the fact that the enraged Little Red's combat strength had increased explosively, the main reason was that Molly was completely out of sorts. Ever since he was forcefully converted into an inferno demon dragon in the underground world, although his physical combat and fire breath had improved, when considering the Inferno Demon Dragon bloodline's reputation in the mortal plane, along with the bloodthirsty, berserk, and other negative traits, it didn't seem like a good deal. If Molly didn't want to go to the Chaos Abyss, he would have to think of a way to solve this problem. And so, Molly attempted to use a secret technique of the dragons to reverse the purgatory transformation and restore the pure immemorial dragon's bloodline. Fortunately for her, since the transformation didn't take too long, and the person who had transformed herself had already perished, Molly, who had mastered countless secret techniques of the dragons, was able to successfully reverse the transformation. However, this did not come without a price. This kind of transformation was equivalent to cutting off a part of her that had already turned into purgatory. Not only would she enter a weakened state for several years due to the great loss of blood, her strength would also decrease by at least 20%. For a short period of time, she would also need to use a portion of her strength to suppress the remaining purgatory blood in her body. It would already be good if she could have half of her combat strength. And so, Molly was viciously beaten up by her own daughter. However, everyone knew what Molly's personality was like. She had surrendered when a demon earl threatened her life. She had just become the new undead emperor's disciple when the situation took a turn for the worse. She had been blocked by an undead emperor in the Bardi capital, and even though she clearly had the strength to fight, she had immediately surrendered after being threatened and bribed. She had even begged for help from her daughter, who had a grudge against her. To quote Little Red's original words, Molly says that the dignity of dragons is above everything else, yet she's sitting on her so-called dignity. Molly is the shame of all dragons. And so, when Molly discovered that her own daughter was far stronger than she was, she immediately surrendered. However, the result was that Molly was beaten up even more viciously. That was because Little Red became angry whenever she saw Molly's lack of dignity. I surrender. Little Red, stop hitting me. Molly shouted out Little Red's baby name as she used her wings and arms to protect her head. However, Little Red's ugly behavior of covering her head and scurrying away made Little Red even more furious. She used her dragon tail, dragon claws, and dragon fists in succession. She waved her dragon wings and swept her dragon tail as she used all sorts of techniques to viciously attack Molly's face. "No matter what, I'm still your mother. Can't you at least give me some face in public? You're still hitting me. Unfilial daughter, I'm going to fight you to the death." Molly's resistance aroused Little Red's fighting spirit. She attacked even more viciously. She even used draconic magic and directly spat dragon breath at Molly's face. "Stop hitting me, it hurts. Please forgive me since I gave birth to you." Molly begged for mercy again as she attacked even more viciously. "At most, I'll just die together with you." She was being stubborn and even more vicious. From a certain standpoint, Molly was quite unlucky. If she had been stubborn to the end, Little Red would have viciously beaten her up to vent her anger. However, the result of Molly repeatedly begging for mercy and fighting with all her might was that Little Red's beating became even more painful. Molly was now covered in wounds, with scales flying everywhere and dragon blood flowing everywhere. Even the spectating adventurers were tempted. Dragon blood from an immemorial dragon. 1 liter can be sold for at least 1,000 gold coins. And scales, dragon scale breastplate. 50,000 gold coins for one. "Don't go over, team leader. You'll die if you touch it." This was a certain greedy team leader. His eyes were filled with nothing but gold coins as he unhesitatingly approached the deadly battlefield. However, he was forcefully stopped by his team members. However, a priest suddenly sighed helplessly and cast a divine buff spell on himself. He then carefully went up to steal Molly's blood. "Anlin, you're insane. Even if you're a priest of the goddess of wealth, you can't go all out like this. You've never been this insane in the past. You're suicidal. Even if you're blinded by greed, you don't have to go this far." The priest named Anlin shook his head with a bitter smile, his face full of helplessness. "It's not that I'm blinded by greed. It's that I just received a divine oracle. If I obtain dragon blood, I'll receive 2 levels of divine favor. If I don't, I'll have to go all out and return to the priest academy as a trainee priest. If I accidentally die, she'll have me go to her divine oracle and become a god's envoy." Anlin's team members opened their mouths wide as they looked towards the north. The goddess of wealth had just performed her divine miracle and was currently fiercely battling against the titans. Molly and Little Red both had semi-god combat strength, and a true god's incarnation was also at the semi-god level. There was no reason why she couldn't descend into the mortal world. Dragon blood from an immemorial dragon was a precious treasure even to the gods. However, only the goddess of wealth would disregard her reputation and ask her believers to collect it. Should I say that as expected of the goddess of wealth, Diana? She's so greedy for money, even now. Anlin's team members stuffed the rest of his words into his mouth. Anlin was badly frightened. "Are you an idiot? That's blasphemy against a god. Not only that, you're so close right now, and you even said the goddess's name." "She heard you." Anlin stopped midway through her angry roar. She then had a strange expression as she spoke to the unlucky person who had caused trouble for himself. "Ochre, the goddess just gave me another divine oracle. She said that she heard it already. If you don't give her 2 liters of dragon blood, she'll make you go bankrupt tomorrow. True gods wouldn't lie. Based on my understanding of the goddess, she's so petty, she'll definitely do what she says." Glorious goddess of wealth, I definitely didn't mean to be blasphemous. Please don't increase my quest to 3 liters. I'll really die. Alright then, now it was 2 people who had caused trouble for themselves. But unfortunately, both of their quests were destined to fail, because an even more vicious one had arrived. "Get out of my way. Little Red, help me hold down Molly. I'm going to give her some blood." Yep, I was back. As for the battle between the gods and the Titans, let them slowly fight it out. After all, the Titans hadn't self-destructed yet, so they were probably still gathering information on the Titans in preparation for their future duel. Since they were so busy, I might as well complete my own quest to level up first. Wasn't it already completed? Wasn't it supposed to be 1 out of 3? Why would I choose this quest to level up as an undead emperor when I already had a better choice? How many years has my system made me suffer for? I'd be an idiot if I couldn't even see through the trap in this quest. This was what the quest said. Frowny-face host has reached the peak of gold. You've already activated more than 3 of your bloodline abilities. Your soul and physical body have perfectly fused together. Your soul imprint has been activated. Semi-god, undead, order, and divine items have been detected in your surroundings. Bloodline hunting quest myth has been activated. System notification. It's time to show off the true value of this physical body. Show those Titans who believe themselves to be perfect what a double diamond bloodline really is. Optional quest. Choose 1 out of 3. Your bloodline will evolve based on your progress. Currently, your bloodline can only withstand 1 evolution. After your bloodline evolves completely, you will begin the path to legend rank. Your War Angel / Original Sin Demon transformation ability will evolve as well. This was the quest's explanation. Indeed, my bloodline could only withstand 1 evolution. However, it didn't say that I couldn't use 2 ingredients simultaneously to evolve my bloodline. The most important part of the trap was that your bloodline will evolve based on your progress. That meant that this was an open quest, just like the previous quest. The rewards would depend entirely on your progress. If I only managed to complete 1 item in the end, although I could still complete it, the system would probably mock me for not knowing how to take advantage of the opportunity. Are you blaming me? Tisk, how many times have I been scammed by you? I still have a good memory. Aha, don't be so happy just yet. You need half the blood of an immemorial dragon to evolve your dragon bloodline. That's a lethal amount. Are you sure that Little Red won't turn on you after you kill Molly? No matter what, she's Little Red's mother. Or do you intend to break all ties with Little Red? Do you think I'm an idiot? Obtain at least half the blood of an immemorial dragon. That means that I only need enough blood. I won't ask Molly or Little Red for a portion. That way, neither of us will die. You want to scam me with such a simple trap? All right then, the system went silent. This meant that my guess was correct. As for the final quest's requirement, which was the Titan materials, I glanced over at the Ultraman battle against the 5-colored squadron not far away. Go. It'll be best if both sides get heavily injured. Bayana. Hurry up and self-destruct. Harumph. Hurry up and die together. Harumph. Harumph. Who are you? Don't bother me, I'm busy. Anlan tugged on my sleeves and said with a bitter smile on her face. The goddess heard everything. She said that she'll split the loot in half when we meet. Otherwise, she'll let go and let the Titan giants come and take care of you. Don't even think about it. Tell him. I don't have any blood, but I only have my life. Come and take it yourself if you have the ability. Chapter 347. Little Red, no matter what, she's still your mother. Can't you give her some face? All right then, the angry female dragon viciously glared at me. As expected of an internal family conflict, any outsider who interfered would end up with nothing good. I really should have been a mute. I think that she's glaring at you because you're currently extracting her mother's blood. Also, just how did that super thick syringe appear? Just what are you intending to do with something like that? I can create ice sculptures from the frigid winter earth, and I can create a mold in 3 minutes. You deserve it. Relax, I'm not interested in injecting a cat. That was a gigantic syringe, or perhaps it would be more appropriate to call it a gigantic electric drill. It was currently drilling into the pitiful Molly's body, and the dragon blood that had just flowed out was directly frozen into pig's blood cake or ice blood brick, which was then stored in my frigid winter earth. Hey, Little Red, I'm just helping her release some blood to weaken her so that she won't cause any trouble. I firmly tied Molly up with a gigantic ice chain, but I noticed that many eyes were looking at me, which made me feel quite uncomfortable. So, I directly opened the door to my frigid winter earth and tossed her inside. At this time, there were still troublesome opponents to deal with, so this was more than enough. After all, it was impossible for her to leave the frigid winter earth. Her Highness, the Goddess of Ice, means, tell her that I won't take anything for myself. I understood what that goddess of wealth priest was trying to say halfway through her sentence. What kind of person was she? She was already thinking about the spoils of war even before the battle was over. Silly cat, don't laugh. I'm not doing this for the spoils of war. I'm doing this to reduce the psychological burden of my comrade. You're still laughing? Stop laughing. We're at war right now, so everyone should be more serious. Little Red was still in her human form. Since the current Molly was far too useless, the battle just now was nothing more than a slightly intense warm-up for Little Red. Currently, her long black hair was dyed red by the fire element, and her white skin was glowing red. Proper exercise had filled her with energy, and the weakened Molly wasn't even able to injure her. Roland? Relax, she won't be able to escape from my prison. We'll deal with her after this is over. Little Red nodded and didn't pursue the matter. Being able to meet Molly in such a situation was a good thing for Little Red. After beating up the shame of the dragons, she was in a much better mood. But when she saw the battle not far away, she furrowed her brows. Roland, should we make a move? Although it was a mindless question, I understood what she meant. She was asking if I would interfere with the battle between the gods and the Titan giant. And the fact that she was asking such a question meant that she wasn't confident in her ability to do so. Little Red had the battle prowess of a demigod, but it had the addition of the ancient dragon bloodline, so its realm was not that high. In reality, the demigod dragons that still existed in this world were all divine dragons from ancient times. They were existences on the same level as the dragon god, and Little Red was still far from that level. From a certain standpoint, the dragons and titans were old friends, and there should be many records about them. She wasn't confident that she would be able to defeat the Titan incarnation, which had been passed down from her tribe for many years. As far as the eye could see, the Titan giants were actually becoming stronger and stronger as they fought. The lightning that had appeared in a berserk manner had actually turned into a real weapon. Thunder Titan Hallett was brandishing his classical heavy sword with one hand and throwing lightning spears with the other, causing the two true god clones to be unable to tell which way was north. Thunder energy attacks perfectly combined with his artistic sword technique. Every attack contained the power of his heart and soul. Compared to Hallett, the true gods were nothing more than chubby fellows. Hallett saw through all their movements, and all their divine arts were directly exposed. From start to finish, the true gods were unable to do any effective damage, and were completely toyed around with. Perhaps both sides were at the same energy level, but the difference in martial arts and combat techniques was obvious to everyone. In the end, they'll probably be forced to self-destruct. If one's energy level and power level represented true combat strength, then there would be no need for anyone to fight at all. Everyone would simply compare whose power level was higher, and the weaker side could simply commit suicide. Due to the world's limitations, both sides' energy levels were about the same. However, due to combat experience, techniques, and other soft factors, it was still impossible to defeat the Titan giant. This was just like how true gods' incarnations would often be able to defeat ordinary semigod. They had experienced far too much and accumulated far too much. Even if ordinary semigods were at the same basic power level as true gods, they would often lose out in terms of experience, special abilities, and many other aspects. Right now, the scene from the past was repeating itself. Only, this time, it was the true god's incarnation that was being crushed. Compared to the Titan giants, who had accumulated countless years of experience, the true gods could only be considered juniors. The difference between the ancient Titans and the true gods was as great as the difference between the true gods and mortals. This wasn't something that could be made up for with hard work alone. Just an incarnation is able to reach such a level. Just how strong would a full-form Titan giant be? Perhaps I would sometimes be arrogant to the point of arrogance. Perhaps I would fight to the death like a mad dog if I was forced to the brink. But as a normal person, fine, I could barely count as a normal person, I definitely didn't like to always be on the line between life and death. Yep, after saying so much, I simply wanted to say that I couldn't defeat the Titan giant. I definitely couldn't defeat them. I only had 300 years of experience, and my current physical body was less than 4 years old. True gods were all at least 1,000 years old. It was said that creatures like Titan giants could easily hibernate for tens of thousands of years, as if they were hibernating day and night. In that case, their theoretical lifespan, I would probably need to prepare a new unit of time just for them. Such an opponent was quite depressing. Don't tell me that hard work would definitely help me win. Don't tell me that immortal species were all trash that only ate food and waited for death. There were indeed trash that only slept, but most of them had already been eliminated by history. Those that hadn't been eliminated were actually ridiculously powerful from a different angle. Yep, I was talking about dragons that slept all day. Perhaps it was quite unfortunate that the Titan giants were hunted down by the true gods the first time they appeared in this generation. But it was precisely because their enemies were so powerful that the Titan giant's strength was revealed. I thought about it for a moment. If I was the one going up, I would probably be instantly killed. System, you really don't have any good intentions. By now, even I was sweating cold sweat. If it wasn't for these good intentions of mine, we would have directly fought against the Titan giants. It was likely that we would have been the ones to be destroyed in just 2 moves. Little Red, who had always been faster with her actions than her mouth, also wanted to ask me about it. However, this also meant that she was feeling guilty. She wasn't a noob, nor was she a proud dragon who believed that she would win no matter what. After a brief evaluation, she also discovered how terrifying those seemingly simple and clumsy attacks were. Every attack was seen through, and every step was dodged in advance. Although they seemed clumsy, they were actually completely suppressed. Even I wouldn't be certain that I could win even if I evolved into a supreme immemorial dragon. Not to mention Little Red, even back when I was still a semi-god Yongya, I could indeed force weaker gods to avoid me with my army. However, gods like the goddess of wealth weren't weak low gods or semi-gods. Yet, they were still beaten to such a state. Even though they were only the incarnations of the Titan giant's will, this was already far beyond what any mortal could handle. If the Titan giants completely recovered, no wonder even the proud dragons would be so anxious and ask for help everywhere. It was all because the Titan giants were far too powerful. Don't think so much into it. The thinker Eanes is ranked 4th among the Titan giants. Although he isn't famous for his melee combat skills, he's still a powerful individual. Even the Titan King has to respect him. As for Silverbow War God Hatley, although he's only ranked in the double digits, he's ranked 5th among the Titan giants in terms of martial arts. None of them are easy to deal with. They can't represent the average combat strength of the Titan giant. You'll still have a chance against the Titan giants who are ranked at the bottom. My system was being considerate for once. While I was astonished at how well-informed I was, I also didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Wasn't this basically telling me that I definitely wouldn't be able to defeat them right now? Little Red, since the true gods haven't asked for reinforcements yet, let's just watch the show for now. Little Red's reply contained a rare hint of depression. Red dragons were naturally arrogant, and they were unique even among dragons. She had always thought highly of herself, but this time, she didn't even have the courage to challenge the Titan giant. Even she felt quite embarrassed. It would seem that I can only give up. Of course, I wanted to complete that semi-god evolution quest. Previously, we had true gods helping us, and our opponents were only semi-gods. Perhaps we wouldn't even need to fight against a complete semi-god. But judging from the current situation, my system wouldn't be at a disadvantage. Even with the help of true gods, it would still be far more difficult to deal with than an ordinary semi-god. Even if there's money to be earned, you'll still need to be alive to spend it. Completing 2 out of 3 evolution quests is already quite good. There should be more chances in the future. For some reason, I recalled the future of the game's history. At a certain point in time, even ordinary semi-gods would become nothing more than cannon fodder. Perhaps the Titan giants would be the first to revive, and that era would arrive. It seemed that it would be impossible for me to complete the evolution quest against such an opponent. However, my desire to become stronger burned deep in my heart. I didn't have any so-called dragon's pride. In fact, it could be said that my motto was to be unscrupulous in order to achieve my goals. But as a powerful individual who had reached this level step by step, how could I not have a slight desire to fight on the battlefield after seeing such an opponent? Next time, I won't be watching from the sidelines. The Titan giants? Even if I can't do it this time, sooner or later, I'll make all of you become food for my evolution. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my flesh. The feeling of helplessness from only being able to watch from the sidelines without doing anything made me feel fatigued from the bottom of my heart. But suddenly, I felt something warm in my palm. I looked to my side in surprise to see that Little Red's palm was also burning up, and her face was flushed red from excitement. Next time, we definitely won't be watching from the sidelines. I'll help you. Little Red's slightly raspy voice contained an unwillingness to accept defeat, as well as her pride from discovering the difference in power. But, even more than that, she was filled with ambition and a mysterious excitement for reaching the next level. Yeah, the warmth in my palm made me feel reassured. In my opinion, Little Red, who was currently blushing all the way to her ears, was incredibly beautiful. Her face was as red as an apple, and she seemed to be burning with fighting spirit just like me. With such a trustworthy comrade, what was there for me to worry about? What was there to hesitate about? No matter how difficult the future is, let's face it together. That's right, we still had room for growth. Wasn't I starting all over again in order to break through my bottleneck and obtain even more room for growth? And even if we met an opponent that we couldn't defeat in a short period of time, we could just repeat what we did in the past and fight together with everyone else. Even if we could only watch from the sidelines, there was no need for us to belittle ourselves. Perhaps my words weren't very clear, but I believed that Little Red would definitely understand. At the very least, my palm would be able to transmit my belief. Yeah, just as I confidently made my declaration of battle, I heard Little Red's tiny reply next to me. I looked over and saw that she was lowering her head, her face even redder than before. It would seem that she was truly depressed. After all, she was a proud dragon's, and her dignity had been damaged. Roland, you've been single for so many years. You really deserve it. The silly cat always chose critical moments to make me feel displeased. But this time, even my system was joining in on the fun. You just beat up your mother-in-law, and you're proposing to her daughter? Well done. System notification. Considering that there's going to be a good show to watch soon, I'll let you comment for free this time. Tui, I'll let you guys watch the show. This time, I'm going to be a coward. I had already made up my mind to put my safety first, but someone wouldn't let me off the hook. Your Highness Roland, the goddess wishes for you to help. Even if I go up, it'll be pointless. Does she want me to help her collect her corpse? Yes, collect her corpse. Fine then, the goddess' original words were, it's fine if you don't want to help, but you even used a flash grenade on me. Don't you know that I've been single for more than 3,000 years? Be careful that I don't burn you to death. Alright, you've achieved your goal. I'm going to self-destruct now. Remember to help me pick up some of my god equipment. If I lose even one, I'll make you pay." Can you say that she's desperate for money? She's truly desperate for money even after death. My goddess said, "Thank you for the compliment. Her skin is so thick that it's comparable to mine." My goddess then said, "Thank you for the compliment, but I'm still not as good as you." I could only smile and shake my head in front of such a shameless goddess. I prepared myself to steal the boss's corpse and loot its equipment as soon as it dies. I seem to have forgotten something. Forget it. Since it's possible to forget, it shouldn't be important. While I was confidently making my preparations, a certain female dragon who was tied up and had lost a lot of blood in the frigid winter continent was frozen pale and weak to the point of death. For red dragons of the fire element, lava and volcanoes were the most comfortable places to call home, while the land of ice and snow was hell. Red dragons had negative ice resistance, and any ice damage they received would be doubled. And right now, Molly was suffering from severe injuries and was frozen to the point of being unable to breathe. "Save me. I'm losing so much blood and freezing temperatures that I'm about to die. I surrender. I surrender. Let me go, I'll do anything you want." Chapter 348. Clones and projections were actually quite common. Many powerful existences from other dimensions were unable to use their true bodies to enter the mortal plane due to dimensional restrictions. They could only use their clones and projections to enter. From a certain standpoint, these dimensional laws were a form of protection for the entire world. When the dimensional tide wasn't high enough, if top-level existences suddenly descended, their very existence could possibly distort the dimensional laws of this world, causing unfathomable effects on certain regions or even the entire mortal plane. For example, if a god whose divine concept was rain descended, he would cause an area several hundred kilometers around him to be in a state of torrential rain for a long period of time. That would basically be the natural enemy of farmers. I definitely wasn't saying that a certain rain god would rain whenever he held a concert, nor was I insinuating that a certain son of misfortune would cause major trouble whenever he stole the headlines. Getting back to the main topic, it would be fine if it was a powerful existence like the rain god who had relatively mild dimensional laws. Rain would still be acceptable, but if a god of volcanoes or son of war descended, that would be quite the problem. For example, when a demon earl descended in his true body, he directly caused a large area of scorched earth and chaos. Even now, the land where his blood dripped onto was still scorched earth without a single blade of grass growing on it. If no one modified or dispelled the negative effects, this effect could last for several decades or even centuries. In some heroic epics, there was also a saying that, "The place where the demon king fell is still filled with evil winds." This actually referred to the same thing. As the elemental tide increased, the dimensional laws of this world were gradually changing. This was just like adding a drop of intense dye into a cup of water. Naturally, the water would change color very quickly. But if the dye was added into a basin of water, a pool of water, or even a river or a lake, it would naturally have no obvious effects. Just like how the human body had mechanisms to resist the invasion of germs, the world of Hechi would also prevent these large-scale viruses from entering unless they were proven to be harmless. For example, in the game's history, when the dimensional tide was at its highest, the mortal plane would become a sea, which would open up all the dimensional doors to the mortal plane. But now that the elemental tide was at its lowest, the dimensional doors were only slightly open. Wanting to enter? That was possible, but it had to be done in accordance with the dimensional laws, and everything that could cause damage had to be left outside. That was why there were incarnations, projections, and other such techniques. Although there were all sorts of strange techniques, in the end it was basically the same principle. That was, first create a physical body that the dimension could accept, and then put the will, soul, and so on into the body. Depending on how many techniques were used, the body would fall into a deep sleep or act normally. However, just like how the immigration and quarantine department could not eliminate all harmful bacteria, even if it was an incarnation, it would still cause an impact. Therefore, just like the security monitoring of foreigners at the airport, the treatment would be different according to their identity. If they were tourists from friendly countries, the inspection procedure would be much simpler. If they were from hostile countries, they might first check if they were spies. If they were super dangerous people who wanted to destroy the world, they might be put under 24-hour surveillance or simply refused entry. It was the same for the incarnations of powerful existences in the various dimensions. They would be treated differently depending on the method of entry, the strength of their incarnations, and many other aspects. The most convenient would probably be the gods from the mortal plane. After all, they were existences who had control over part of the dimensional laws. They would be equivalent to civil servants in their own countries, and the inspection would be nothing more than a mere formality. They would only need to use their own churches to descend, and their incarnations wouldn't need to expend any additional divine power to maintain. And of course, there would be those who were exempted from inspection as well as those who were strictly guarded and restricted from entering the mortal plane. The ones who received the harshest treatment were probably the demons and devils. After all, they possessed the power of chaos, which was the natural enemy of all dimensional laws. Not only that, they were notorious for their misdeeds. As long as they entered the mortal plane, it was highly likely that they would be up to no good. If a certain devil lord or demon lord were to descend, it would be a major incident in a certain region, or some scheme that would affect a large region or even the entire continent. At such a time, all the gods' churches would take action and viciously attack the believers of the devil lord. And if a powerful demon incarnation truly descended and did something, it was highly likely that a true god's incarnation would also arrive. That was why it was quite difficult for the powerful individuals from the lower planes, who were almost 100% refused to enter the mortal plane. Not only would these most unpopular stowaways require evil rituals like blood sacrifices to open the dimensional door, even if their incarnations were able to descend, they would still need to expend energy to maintain their incarnations. But sooner or later, they would use up all of their energy reserves and would have to obediently return to the chaos abyss or hell, just like the stowaways who were discovered during a sudden inspection and sent back. By the way, I should mention that not long ago, the demon Marquis Eliza finally used up all of the beastman's blood sacrifices to allow her to descend. She could only helplessly dispel her incarnation and return to the chaos abyss. As for me, I once again returned to the awkward situation of having to call her every day to greet her. Getting back to the main topic, the gods' incarnations and incarnations weren't something that could be easily obtained. Not only did they contain their own divine power and dimensional shards, they also contained the existence of their divine souls. If they died, it would definitely be a major loss. It was likely that even the main body's divine power would decrease, which would require a large amount of faith and time to recover. That was why there were many schemes against the gods. Since it was impossible to destroy the gods' main body that was far away in their divine kingdom, they would at most destroy an incarnation. Being able to kill a true god's incarnation or having a god's incarnation killed by a mortal would be a major event that would be recorded in history. Of course, the former would be heroic, while the latter would be laughed at by undying existences for several hundred years. Although the incarnation's power would be limited, since it wouldn't be the main body, there was no need to worry about the incarnation dying. There were pros and cons to this. But from a certain standpoint, the death of an incarnation also meant that the soul would experience a virtual death, which was unavoidable. That was why, if possible, the gods would usually choose to descend into their own believers or priests. This way, they would be able to use power far greater than their incarnations, and they wouldn't have to worry about the effects of the incarnation dying. However, there were far too few mortals who possessed the special abilities of a god's descent. The death rate of a god's descent was also far too high, which was why the incarnation was always the number one choice. But for a true god, losing a single incarnation would be a waste of several hundred years of work. Perhaps their main body would be surrounded and attacked by their enemies because they were in a weakened state. This was no small matter. In fact, many demon lords and true gods had lost their incarnations in the mortal plane because their incarnations were killed off in the mortal plane and then ambushed by their mortal enemies. These true gods took advantage of their weakened state to permanently eliminate their incarnations. And right now, the goddess of wealth was actually forced to choose to self-destruct her incarnation. It was evident that she had been forced to her limits and had lost all confidence in victory. She knew that if this continued, she would still be defeated and lose her incarnation, so she might as well drag the goddess of wealth down with her. As a junior god, it wasn't shameful for her to be forced to such a state by the Titan giants. However, she had truly suffered a great loss this time, so it was no wonder that her tone was so angry. She was also doing her best to make up for her losses. Have a safe journey. You're truly a great person who sacrifices yourself for others. I'll miss you. I did my best to wave my handkerchief and wish Baena a safe journey. However, I received a death glare from her. And so, I switched to a way of saying goodbye from my homeland, and started singing a song that was said to be used to say goodbye to heroic martyrs. Ah, goodbye, friend, goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Baena, hurry up and self-destruct. I can't take it anymore. Ah, goodbye, friend, goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. I'll bury you on a high mountain and stick a beautiful flower in your grave. I seem to have forgotten the rest of the lyrics. Forget it, it's enough as long as the meaning is there. Martyr Baena, have a safe journey. Don't miss me too much. I'll help you pick up your remains. The goddess of wealth singing passed through the priest's ears to the goddess of wealth. I waved my hand even harder, but only received an even fiercer glare. Suddenly, the goddess of wealth, who seemed to be made of gold, grit her teeth with a face full of resentment. Just like a collapsing Buddha statue, she cracked open, and countless flashes of golden light shot out, transforming the entire world into a golden color. Asterisk boom. Asterisk then, there was a blinding light and a deafening explosion that made it impossible to open one's eyes. Sigh, and here I thought that the goddess of wealth's self-destruction would have something new, such as suddenly dropping money. It seems that as long as it's self-destruction, there's nothing new or different about it. Your Highness Roland, the goddess says that she heard everything, and she's furious right now. She's saying, you better reveal something new for me. And, as long as you miss even one item, she'll swear that you'll be in trouble. Alright then, since I agreed, let's get to work. I didn't waste any time due to my thick ice shield. I leapt into the air on my ice Pegasus, and was about to charge forward at high speed when I was suddenly stopped by the scene before me. The self-destruction of a true god's incarnation was the equivalent of detonating all the accumulated divine power and dimensional laws within the incarnation. In terms of attack power, it would far surpass a true god's own divine attack. In terms of quantity, it would be equivalent to detonating all of the incarnation's divine power that could be used for several years. Plus, the true god would lose faith, power, and divine soul in the explosion. Logically speaking, if a true god's incarnation self-destructed, not only would it kill an incarnation of the same level, even the true god's main body would be directly killed. This was also why true god's incarnations were able to do whatever they wanted on the ground, and why clones rarely fought against each other. At most, they would sacrifice an incarnation and self-destruct, which would at least result in mutual destruction. However, the rule that a true god's incarnation self-destructed was broken right before my eyes. He didn't die even after that? Half of the Thunder Titan's body was gone. His right hand and right leg were gone, and the right side of his face was visible to the bone. It was quite a frightening sight. Perhaps the shattered pieces of his thunder shield on the ground explained why he was still alive. In that short instant, he had transformed all of his thunder power into a physical shield that blocked the self-destruction's impact and protected his own core. False gods, is this still the only attack you have? If I had a complete physical body, your weak attacks wouldn't even be able to make me bleed. The damage from a divine power self-destruction was quite difficult to endure. It was likely that he wouldn't be able to recover in a short period of time. Yet, even though he was injured so badly, he was still laughing loudly as if he were the true victor. Perhaps he could indeed be called the victor since he was able to force a true god's incarnation to self-destruct without dying. Even though he had already collapsed, the Thunder Titan viciously glared at the female dwarf goddess with his remaining eye. He supported himself with his left hand and tried to stand up, but he seemed to have lost his balance. Then, he gritted his teeth and transformed the thunder on his right leg into an artificial limb that resembled a statue's armor. A new saw of thunder appeared in his empty right arm. A vicious glint appeared in his remaining eye, and the bones on the right side of his face were eerie. However, the saw of thunder that he kept waving around kept buzzing. He was already in such a state, yet he still wanted to fight? Mary paused in surprise for a moment, but then she calmly raised her war hammer and unhesitatingly charged forward. The dwarf gods were never afraid of challenges. Since the Thunder Titan hadn't collapsed yet, the battle between the gods naturally continued. An injured beast was the most dangerous of all. Two powerful existences were currently fighting against each other. I felt like I was in a bad situation. If I charged forward and got hit, wouldn't I be directly reincarnated? I feel like I'll still die if I go up. This is probably an unstoppable force. The goddess means that if you don't bring back the golden scepter and Seraph's feather pen, she'll cancel your contract hero account and curse you to become the person with the worst fortune in the entire world. This curse will last for at least 3 years. At that time, you won't have enough money to survive for more than 2 hours. You'll run into scammers when you eat, fake goods when you buy. Even if you go out to buy groceries, you'll run into 3 scammers and a dozen thieves. It can't be that bad, can it? It's even worse than I said. In the past, there was a high-level priest in my church who made false accounts to scam others. In the end, the goddess also cursed him with bankruptcy. That very day, his merchant guild went bankrupt, and his wife and daughter both ran away. Then, his only residence was smashed into a crater by a meteor. Even when he was a beggar, other beggars would rob him of his money. He only managed to survive for a week before committing suicide. Alright then, my scalp was going numb. But since I agreed, I would probably have to do it no matter what. But before I could do anything, I heard a voice in my head. I'm so full. Is this self-destruction? Is this what war is? Amazing. So delicious. I turned around and saw that faceless incarnation of war was standing there. Although I couldn't see his face clearly, I could faintly sense that he was staring at the gods' clones and titan giants as if they were some sort of delicacy. A newborn son of war could only grow in battle. Since he was born prematurely, he would need large amounts of nutrition to replenish himself. Not only that, he would also need to find his own path in the future. In a way, this battle between the gods had given him an excellent opportunity to grow again. And for grave earth demons, the corpses of gods were naturally the most valuable nutrition. The power and rumbling of the explosions caused War to make a decision. He now had a better understanding of the future and what he wanted to pursue. War. This is war. Explosions are war. War is explosions. I faintly felt as if another face had appeared on that empty face. This face was quite similar to that of the goddess who had just self-destructed. I didn't even have the time to sigh at how easy it was for children to learn bad things when he disappeared right in front of me. Right after that, the entire battlefield began to shake. As the ground shook violently, a large hole suddenly opened up. It was as if some demonic creature was about to be released from the depths of hell. That's Davy and his army. Suddenly, the invisible undead army that had disappeared suddenly rushed out from the hole in the ground, charging towards the true gods and Titan giants. War. The gods are our allies. Kill those Titan giants. Fortunately, I reacted quickly, allowing War's undead army to reappear and choose a path. The surrounded Titan giants didn't even spare a glance at these little toys. He only had eyes for the powerful gods. Why would he care about these little things? Those mortal armies weren't even able to block a casual attack from him. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the Death Knight at the very front self-destructed. The power of the explosion caused Titan Giant's feet to go numb as he furrowed his eyebrows. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the bone dragon that was tearing at his head in the sky self-destructed. The power of its self-destruction caused his forehead to hurt. The explosive power of ice made him feel rather disgusted. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the Lich that had crawled up to Titan Giant's knees self-destructed. Titan Giants clutched his knees in pain as he cried out in pain. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the nimble zombie king jumped into the giant's mouth and then violently self-destructed, causing the epic-ranked undead lord to shine with a blinding light. In fact, several of Titan Giant's teeth even appeared in the sky. Asterisk boom. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the densely packed undead on Titan Giant's knees self-destructed together. This time, Titan Giants couldn't stand still, so he could only collapse to the ground. Rumble. 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 When the ant-like undead army climbed up the giant's body, the continuous sounds of explosions never stopped. What was even more frightening was that the undead that had just self-destructed didn't die. The undead that crawled out of the hole in the ground never stopped. The Lich that had just self-destructed on Titan Giant's knees grabbed onto Titan Giant's ears this time, igniting his berserk soulfire to self-destruct again. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the entire world was filled with the sounds of self-destruction. Even the dwarf gods were astonished. The Grave Earth Demon's undead revival ability. Even if they lose a single individual, they can still revive and replenish themselves? Roland, you actually created such a monster? Do you really intend to destroy the world? Wah, seeing that father is worried, he voluntarily helped him out. War is such a considerate and good child. I should buy him some presents next time. Right, let's hold a birthday celebration party for him. Harlois, what did you just say? I was so moved that tears welled up in my eyes. However, everyone around me silently took a step back as if they were trying to distance themselves from this dangerous individual. However, I suddenly thought of something and smiled at my magic sword. Harlois, as your child's mother, remember to prepare a birthday present for him. You can't just sing a happy birthday song to him. That definitely won't do. Can you be more steady? You're already so old and the mother of a child, yet you're still randomly biting people. You're biting even harder. Chapter 349. It was said that when Baena self-destructed, a sky-covering golden holy light illuminated the entire sky. Not only did the residents of the Forest of Dreams and Nitrain City see it, even the residents of the Mage Country on the other side of the sea saw the golden clouds in the sky. If it wasn't for the fact that Baena controlled the area of her self-destruction, perhaps the entire Oak Town would have been blown up as well. And when the suddenly evolved War displayed his potential, causing the Thunder Titan to face the danger of being destroyed, his older brother finally didn't ignore the death of his younger brother's incarnation. After all, for the Thunder Titans who were still sealed into stone statues, every bit of power was precious. Eanes, the Thinker, who had been holding back all this time, finally used his full power. And when he destroyed a portion of War's army and rescued Hatley, the other true god's incarnations didn't make things difficult for him. After all, if the Thunder Titan's incarnations were pushed too far, wouldn't they be able to self-destruct as well? The other true gods weren't confident that they would be able to protect their own incarnations. This was also why ganging up on the incarnations of high-level existences wasn't worth it. If they were forced into a corner, they would self-destruct. In the end, since it wasn't their true bodies, there wouldn't be any spoils of war left. Naturally, no one would be willing to provoke a porcupine covered in spikes. It was just like how some summoned creatures in video games would be difficult to kill without any money, experience, or equipment. Nobody would be willing to fight them. And since the true gods' incarnations, who were the main fighting force, didn't want to continue this bloody battle, we naturally wouldn't allow the Thunder Titans to escape. Although War still wanted to continue, he didn't have the ability to travel at high speed in a bloody battle, nor was he able to catch up to the Thunder Titans. And so, this battle had officially come to an end. We won! We finally survived. When the cheers of Oaktown rang out, sighs of lucky survivors also rang out at the same time. All sorts of experts appeared one after another, and the power that could crush a person's body with just a touch was enough to make one's heart tremble. Perhaps for the first generation of contract heroes, this day would be unforgettable for the rest of their lives. The battle that happened in this short one day would have a tremendous impact. Titans, gods, undead emperors, and undead calamities were all existences that could only be seen in epic stories. Not only did they appear in real life, they were even fighting against each other. This far surpassed the heroes' understanding. Perhaps they had only been trying to make a living in the past, or perhaps they had only been trying to obtain more resources. But now, the Titan and Giant God, who seemed to have walked out of the epic saga, had given them the opportunity to interact with the strongest individuals. Now, they felt that they had gotten involved in a major event. This was a revolution that was destined to happen in this generation. However, this was also an opportunity that this generation would give to the courageous. Perhaps one day we will also have the strength to do something on such a battlefield, instead of shivering and praying in a corner. Some things would only be pursued after one had come into contact with them. Only when one discovered the difference between them would one think of ways to make up for it. It wasn't that it was impossible to accomplish many things, but rather that one didn't dare to think about them. And once the fire of ambition was ignited, it would be incredibly difficult to extinguish it. This was the same logic as how classic video games in a certain world would always show a cool and flashy battle animation before the game started. Perhaps you wouldn't be able to do it now, or perhaps you would never be able to do it as well as in the animation, but at the very least, you would have hope. Not only would you have hope for the game itself, but you would also have hope for what you would obtain from the game. Perhaps many things are different from before. Of course, I also believed that after walking on the border between life and death, witnessing such an incredibly dangerous battle at the pinnacle, and feeling the fear of death, many people would definitely quit their jobs tomorrow. However, there would definitely be people who would be even more passionate about it. This was a test given to them by this generation, as well as an opportunity. This was a shortcut that could help them reach the pinnacle step by step. This was a stairway to the heavens that they would never be able to obtain anywhere else. When I get back, let's increase the number of contract heroes in the second batch. 300,000 in the entire continent, or maybe 500,000. This was also what I was hoping for. Perhaps after today, the second batch of contract heroes would become even more popular. After all, if it wasn't for the fact that I had accepted this contract, it would have been impossible for me to come into contact with the highest level battle. Let's ignore the true gods of ALS faction for now, as they had already used their actions to show their support. This was also why the goddess of wealth had chosen to self-destruct in the end. If the Titan giants were allowed to destroy Oaktown, who would suffer the greatest losses? The wood spirits' new attempt to expand their territory would fail, but that wouldn't mean that they would suffer many losses. Most of the wood spirits would be able to retreat and start all over again. However, if the first batch of contract heroes met with an enemy that was absolutely impossible to defeat on their first large-scale mission, causing a large number of deaths, it was likely that this system's credibility would be greatly damaged. The loss of the Wood Spirits members wouldn't matter much. The loss of justice points and the faction's credibility would be the most severe. Although the first batch of contract heroes had been attracted by the rewards, they had only joined because of the Ale faction's power level and trustworthiness. Otherwise, no matter how many precious treasures tempted them, nobody would be willing to join a sinking ship. No one capable of ascending to godhood would be an idiot. Bayanna, the goddess of wealth, who had hidden connections with the Ale faction, could clearly see all of this. The second and third time can suffer losses and fail. After all, there will be risks along with rewards. Most people can understand this. However, the first time definitely can't fail, nor can a large number of deaths occur. Otherwise, it will cause a serious crisis of trust. That was why she had secretly made preparations. In order to prevent any accidents from occurring during this first large-scale mission, she had brought the other true gods' incarnations down to the mortal world. And now, at a critical moment, she could still choose to have her incarnations escape and wait for the other true gods to act. After all, if things developed to a certain point, it was even possible that Ale would personally act. However, she had resolutely chosen to self-destruct her incarnations, which would suffer the greatest losses. But she didn't. Not only did she want the group's large-scale mission to succeed, she also wanted the contract heroes to suffer as few losses as possible. On a different level, her self-destruction was a clear indication of her attitude. Even I'm willing to self-destruct, so why are you mortals so afraid? From a certain standpoint, this self-destruction was excellent political propaganda. Even the true gods were willing to sacrifice themselves by self-destructing their incarnations. Even the legendary Titan giants had been defeated. Not a single one of the new contract heroes had died. This was obviously an unprecedented level of support for the new contract heroes. And on another level, Bayanna's losses would be compensated by her companions. At the very least, as far as I knew, Ale had never been a stingy god. Perhaps he would compensate her even more than her losses. And her self-destruction not only gave her a favorable impression of me, but also made me owe her a favor. Favors didn't count for much? For some people, favors indeed didn't count for much. They would even repay favors with enmity. But for others, they would rather be stabbed than owe others a favor. Fine, I admit it. I hated owing others favors the most. Seeing someone else would make me remember that I owed them money, which was quite a disagreeable feeling. I should think of a way to repay this favor as soon as possible. As expected of the goddess of wealth, perhaps she'll even benefit from this self-destruction. She's probably already calculated everything in her heart. Actually, with Bayanna stomping her foot in anger on her divine throne, Roland had thought too much into this. Bayanna had only faintly felt that she would suffer a loss if she lost, but because of Roland's incessant encouragement, her blood pressure kept rising, and she ended up self-destructing in anger. Not only that, her self-destruction hadn't even killed her opponent. She was so humiliated that she was so angry that she sealed off her divine kingdom and refused to see any of her companions who came to comfort her. With Bayanna's rather narrow-minded personality, it was quite normal for her to vent her anger on Roland. Perhaps now that she thought about it, she would even remember Roland as a grudge holder and find an opportunity to take revenge. Of course, since they were on the same side, and they were comrades who would work together in the future, it was quite impossible for her to directly cause trouble for him. However, pranks to make Bayanna feel bad for a bit were perfectly fine. The curse of even though I have so much money, I'll be unlucky if I buy anything luxurious, and I'll end up having to buy only instant noodles. The curse of even though I have a harem, I can only afford to rent a 3-square-meter room, and all my harem members have run away, the curse of even though I'm the Moonlight tribe, I can't live for more than 3 hours without a salary, and I don't have more than 5 copper coins in my wallet. The curse of a certain seductress is lucky to possess. It's quite troublesome to develop too many poverty curses. Which one should I use? Due to certain reasons, no matter which curse Baiana chose, she would probably gain nothing. In the near future, she would indeed discover this fact. What? There's actually no effect? Could it be that his fortune will forever be locked at the very top? That's impossible. Even the god of fate wouldn't be able to do such a thing. Or, based on the principle that the weak wouldn't be able to affect the strong, does he already have an even stronger poverty curse on him? How is this possible? He even has the phrase pauper? What an enviable title. I'm 30 million in debt, but I can't find a rich young lady who's willing to buy me. My curse is also ineffective? Just what's going on with his fortune? Actually, from the very start, all these curses that were related to fate were ineffective against Roland. Perhaps from the day that his system caught up to him, or perhaps from the day that he was born as the child of fate, he was destined to break through the lower limits of his negative luck stat. In front of such extreme misfortune, how could these poverty curses possibly have any effect? I'm so impressed that he's still able to survive despite being so unlucky. When the curious Baiana obtained Roland's past records, she saw how his country was destroyed and his home was destroyed, how he was deceived by his first girlfriend and stabbed in the back, how he was betrayed by his faith in the holy light and stabbed in the back, how he was attacked and stabbed in the back by the hero that he personally trained, how he was judged and stabbed in the back by the disciple that he treated as his daughter. Baiana, who was known as a goddess who had no tears or blood, couldn't help but cry tears of sympathy as she read the series of tragedies in Roland's life. He's just too strong. It's no longer enough to describe his life as a tea table filled with tragedies. It's like a kitchen chopping board filled with knives and a sponge filled with holes. Roland, it really hasn't been easy for you. Later on, some people asked the goddess of wealth why she, who was known as the most miserly person in history, would only give a 10% discount to Roland, as well as many other benefits. Could it be that there really was something going on between Roland and Roland? At such a time, people would be astonished to find that the goddess who was known as someone who only had money in her eyes was actually tearing up emotionally. As long as you can be as pitiful as him and still be able to smile and be poor all day long, I can give you a 10% discount as well. Of course, some people didn't believe this and actually applied to try it out. The result was only 100 different poverty curses stacked on top of each other. Baiana didn't even have the chance to ask the goddess of love to add a curse of bachelorhood, or the god of victory to add a curse of almost succeeding, before that person pitifully begged for mercy. It was said that if she had waited any longer, that person would have been forced to hang himself. In fact, after this rumor spread, Roland even gained the cool nickname of Envoy of Misfortune. Cough, cough, getting back to the main topic, let's focus on the present. No matter what, we had won this battle in the end, and this battle would have far-reaching consequences. Currently, Roland didn't have the time to participate in a celebratory banquet. A new problem was waiting for him. He was currently smiling at Little Red while doing his best to give first aid to a gigantic female dragon. Poor Molly. She had lost a lot of blood, and she had been forgotten in the most dangerous of ice and snow land. Now she was barely breathing. How about you try giving her CPR? Why did you hit me? Now that she's stopped breathing, isn't it normal to give her CPR? Fine, if you don't want to do it, then I'll do it. You're hitting me again? Even the Buddha would get angry. I'll go all out against you crazy women. Chapter 350. In the new town, giant oak trees grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. The light green essence of nature spread in the air. White balls of light swam between the trees. Then, trees rose from the ground. Very soon, these trees exceeded the limits of ordinary trees. In just a short 10 minutes, there was already a forest as far as the eye could see. What followed was a change in the natural laws of the world. Any powerful individual could sense that something was changing in the air. That intense feeling of being in another world was impossible to get rid of. The will of a new dimension had arrived. What followed was a wooden door that suddenly appeared in front of the giant oak tree. The door was more than 20 meters tall and 50 meters wide. The decorations on the door were still in the wood spirit style. Vines wrapped around the wooden door frame, and the carvings were all flowers and trees. It was a simple and natural beauty. Little Samantha looked like a tiny bean in front of the enormous door. But when she placed her hand on the door handle, she attracted everyone's attention. Clap. When Samantha lightly pushed open the door, it slowly opened, and the adventurers discovered that it was even brighter on the other side. Boom. The gigantic foot of the ancient tree shook the earth. The gigantic plant war machine that could only grow in the forest of dreams was the first to pass through the door. The wood spirit's heavy armor had finally arrived at this new type of town. Following them were the wood spirit guards with all sorts of strange machines. They weren't like the forest fairies in fairy tales who were driving magic carriages. Instead, they were driving mechanized troops, and their tiny bodies were currently sitting on the cushions as they tiptoed to operate the handlebars of the motorcycles. There were actually 6 wood spirits stuffed into the hopper next to them. I couldn't help but think back to a certain motorcycle parade in a certain large country. There was also a joke on the internet about how a single motorcycle could carry an entire battalion of soldiers, only now did everyone finally heave a sigh of relief. These seemingly cute little fellows were the true elites of the wood spirit species. Their arrival signified that Oaktown was now a part of the Forest of Dreams. That wasn't the only thing that made the wood spirits feel surreal. They all carried the newest dwarven guns and cannons. They also had steam valves on their waists that could shoot out shiny ropes and grappling hooks into tree trunks within half a second, allowing them to roam freely in the trees. These were guerrilla warfare tools that I had specially prepared for them. Although the wood spirits had natural magic talent and excellent magic talent as mages, the newly born wood spirits had no intentions of rejecting mechanical products. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Due to our special relationship with Thorn Garden, not only was the wood spirits highly interested in the newly born field of magical engineering, they even ordered a large number of mechanical products and sent out many members to study and research magical engineering. They hoped that magical engineering would truly become the wealth of the wood spirit. The wood spirit's research and purchasing choices were all based on their own strengths and weaknesses. Their strengths were obvious, and they had many advantages, but there was no need to go into detail. Their weaknesses were their short stature, which meant that they lacked mobility and melee combat abilities. That was why the wood spirits were especially interested in transportation tools and long-range weapons. They already had magical plants and strengthened outer shells, so they didn't need mechas. However, judging from how the wood spirits were tiptoeing on their motorcycles, it was obvious that it would be quite difficult for them to use normal-sized transportation tools. In fact, Samantha even requested that I make a special transportation tool for smaller bodies. When I suggested a certain design, Samantha revealed a rare smile of satisfaction. But the next day, not only did she completely change her mind, she even formed a team to hunt me down. How ridiculous! That idiot was the one who pointed out that the design was for a baby carriage. I'm definitely going to teach her a lesson. With this body type, a large baby carriage is obviously perfect for it. Forget it, even if this design is rejected, I still have a backup design. Do you even need someone else to point it out? Samantha was far too innocent to notice. You actually installed a baby bedbell on top of the motorcycles? Don't you know that Samantha has already treated this as the greatest shame of her life? You even dared to make a backup design? Let me guess, is it a baby chair or a baby bed? Neither. It's a children's electric scooter. You can run on it with just 1 foot. Harloise, do you need one? What I need is for you to become enlightened and help me return to my normal body type. Fortunately, you didn't mention skateboarding shoes. Have you heard that there's a brainwashing song going around recently? You want me to sing it for you? Cough. Let's not talk about these minor incidents for now. From a certain standpoint, the wood spirits had a rather special relationship with me. Outsiders would obviously think that we were on the same side. In fact, the three virtues would indeed listen to me. Even now, Samantha was still in control of the wood spirit. This meant that almost all of the wood spirits were under my command. But if you looked at the root of the wood spirits, Amelia was the true creator of the wood spirit. My current authority was equivalent to Amelia's authority to entrust things to me. Once Amelia woke up and we had conflicting opinions, I felt that the wood spirits would probably still listen to their mother. Is this what happens when a child sees his parents fighting? Most of the time, the child won't side with his father, who's working so hard to earn money, but will side with his mother, who's always by his side and raising him? The silly cat's words made me feel mysteriously uncomfortable, but I still nodded in agreement. She was right. Although everyone knew that it was correct to side with reason rather than family, it was likely that most people would choose to side with reason rather than with reason. Not only that, from a foundational standpoint, they only listen to me because Amelia wants them to listen to me. This is especially true since they're an intelligent species that has its own will from birth. Amelia's existence is the forest of dreams that raised them, and they're incredibly dependent on each other. It's likely that under Amelia's leadership, the wood spirits will become the most united intelligent species in all of history. For me, this was an acceptable result. I didn't have any ambition to take over the entire wood spirit species, but, for some reason, I feel incredibly uneasy whenever I think about how such a powerful species is under Amelia's control. Don't say it. I'm also worried that she'll suddenly go crazy and come up with some strange idea. In the past, when she went crazy, the amount of damage she could do was limited. If the entire wood spirit species goes crazy together with her, that'll be quite the joke. Alright then, when I considered the insane plants versus zombies, as well as the fact that the wood spirits were climbing higher and higher on the calamity rankings, I felt more and more like I was in danger. This was no different from a crazy woman who might go crazy at any moment holding a nuclear button in her hand. What? I fit all of those conditions perfectly? I was in danger as well? I really wanted to defend myself, but I suddenly felt that what she said made a lot of sense. For a moment I was actually rendered speechless. Perhaps, at least, barely, I can still act according to my own rules. At the very least, I'm slightly more stable than Amelia. Cough, getting back to business, there was nothing I could do about it even if I was worried. Let's see if I could come up with a safety valve when the time came. Right now, after the wood spirits took over this city, the happiest ones were the contract heroes. After all, they had worked so hard for so long, and it was time to reap the rewards. Since there was expected to be a major battle, the wood spirits rewarded the contract heroes quite handsomely with justice points. Although the heavy responsibility of the final battle had been taken over by someone else, the contract heroes had already done their part. Although they didn't receive any bonuses, their basic rewards wouldn't be deducted. Meanwhile, I also received a little toy of my own. Oaktown Miracle Battle Bronze Medal? Did I get one as well? I only defended the city. Military achievement medals were also a part of my credit system. And in this generation where night warriors were the norm, there was nothing more tempting than military achievements, combat achievements, and honor. The past evaluation system was far too crude. Only the nobles would record their past achievements on their family emblems. Even for the nobles, if they wanted their achievements to be recorded in their family records and emblems, they would only be able to record their achievements as great as the Dragon Slayer. This was something that would rarely be seen in one's entire lifetime. Warriors born as commoners would only be able to prove their past achievements with their mouth. If they weren't able to reach the level where bards would brag about them, then they would never be able to make a name for themselves. But now, things were much simpler. A small military achievement medal would prove that you had participated in this battle and made corresponding contributions. Even if it wasn't used to prove anything, it would still be quite cool to wear. Perhaps it would even be able to trick young girls. It's just a war victory medal. It won't cost many copper coins, but it'll definitely win people's hearts. It'll also be easy to increase their loyalty. Once they have a bunch of medals, they won't just toss away all the achievements they've worked so hard to accumulate, right? From a certain standpoint, this is also wealth that they've worked so hard to accumulate. Considering the fact that the people of this world were quite intelligent, I had seen quite a few fakes and imitations before. Perhaps a certain credit system like this would soon appear in the world. And since this type of war victory medal would have a serial number and record of the recipient, it would probably be impossible to obtain one no matter what. I also wore one, but it was a gold medal. This time there were 3 types of war victory medals: bronze, silver, and gold. Bronze was the reward for participating in the war, and the number of gold medals for participating in each battle definitely wouldn't exceed a single digit. As for the last one, I seemed to have contributed the most out of all the mortals, so I also received a gold medal. I heard that the goddess of wealth had locked herself in her room after she self-destructed. Considering how greedy she was, I asked Big Sis Mary to give Bayanna a 24-karat gold, diamond-studded, custom-made war achievement medal when I returned the 2 god equipment to her. I even made it glow in the night. Even if she didn't wear it, she could hang it around her neck like a light bulb. Even if she didn't wear it, she could still use a string to hang it around her neck as a light bulb. Even if she didn't wear it, she would still be able to see it shining from a kilometer away. But several days later, at dawn, I discovered a shooting star above my head. Before I could even make a wish, I discovered that it was flying directly towards my head. If it weren't for my quick reactions, my head would have been smashed apart. Hey! You're not giving me any face at all. Even if you don't want to accept it, you don't have to do this. When I discovered that the fatal, hidden weapon was actually that custom-made military achievement medal, I naturally became furious. That can't be. Bayanna shouldn't be such a person. Let me take a look. The silly cat flipped the medal over and read out the words on it. Thank you, venerated goddess of wealth, for self-destructing. She was a noble goddess, a pure goddess, a goddess who had transcended all vulgar taste. The light she gave off when she self-destructed illuminated our path forward. Her tombstone is a milestone in our progress. In order for history to remember her glory, I shall erect a statue of her, engraving the glorious moment of her self-destruction. Roland Mist. Roland, I'm truly astonished that she didn't descend to the mortal world to kill you. Actually, if it weren't for the fact that someone was currently blocking the entrance to Bayanna's divine kingdom, it was likely that the goddess who kept shouting, "Let go of me! I'm going to kill that bastard!" would have done exactly as Harloise had said. What? I'm just doing what I usually do, giving top-level equipment a bit of fashion. In this day and age, myth-ranked equipment doesn't have some yellow words on it. No matter how powerful its stats are, it'll still seem weak. Considering the goddess' past deeds, you should give your money pouch to me for safekeeping. At the very least, I can't let my stomach suffer together with you. It's immoral to abuse cat. You only remember that you're a pet every time you're in an advantageous position. How convenient. Although I was rambling on and on, it seemed that I had really accidentally offended the goddess. Considering that I didn't have good luck with money to begin with, I directly handed over my money pouch. However, where's my money? Was it stolen? Did the curse come so quickly? Bayanna, how did you steal so quickly? I have 2 pieces of news, one good and one bad. The good news is that you weren't cursed. The bad news is that you don't need to be cursed, which means that your luck is already 0. Don't accuse others wrongly this time. You're just unlucky. The good news is that at your current level, You don't need to worry about your luck getting worse. You really don't want to consider changing your job class to a spearman? The curse of luck seems to be a blessing to you. Alright then, I directly ignored my system's comment. Since my system guaranteed that it wasn't a curse, I felt slightly more reassured. I still had a headache dealing with the petty goddess of wealth. Harloise, do you have any money? Otherwise, we'll have to sleep on the street. Have you ever seen a cat that carries money and spends money? How about you pawn off your gold medal? I can consider it. However, I have an even better idea. You can transform into a magic sword, right? Then, I can pretend to be a lucky person who found a god equipment on the battlefield and have those profiteers come to us of their own volition. Then, we'll sell you off, and you can come back yourself. That way, you'll be able to earn enough money to pay for your meals. Hey, don't run away. I'll give you a third, okay? Half. In the end, my plan to punish the profiteers failed due to the fact that the goods themselves didn't cooperate. In the end, the wood spirits took us in, so we didn't have to pitifully sleep on the street. The gods had all returned to their own divine kingdoms, leaving Audjen in my care. As for Marie and the gay god, Marie wasn't interested in military medals at all. She did extort a batch of high-quality wine from me. As for the gay god, I couldn't even defeat a gay god that kept looking at me lovingly. I couldn't even wait to avoid him. How could I possibly take the initiative to interact with him? Thanks to Little Red's assistance, I finished preparing my first evolution ritual. The blood pool I put down could now be used as a swimming pool. That's strange. She's so willing to give me her blood. Something seems off about Little Red recently. Could it be? Spring is here. Everything is coming back to life. It's time for animals to mate again. Harloise lazily added to my troubles, but how could I possibly allow myself to be confused by her? I kept thinking about it, and finally came to a realization and came to a conclusion. Could it be that she picked up something unclean on the ground and ate it? How old is she? How could she do such a foolish thing? Chapter 351. Thank you, everyone, for your hard work. I hope that our future cooperation will be even smoother and smoother. Samantha, who was standing on the podium, looked at the thick script in her hand and tilted her head. She thought about it for a moment before nodding and letting go of the script. She then continued speaking. Of course, I'll skip ahead. Thank you, everyone, for your continued support. Cheers. Oh, thank you, everyone. Lowly, long live the wood spirits. The cutest little Samantha is amazing. She's truly my angel. Who's your angel? Lady Samantha belongs to everyone. At the celebration banquet, Samantha said these words as if she was reading her lines. She used the preamble to skip the thick script of her speech, and the adventurers responded enthusiastically, although the direction of the response seemed a little strange. Why do I feel like she's more and more like an idol celebrity than the leader of an entire species? Sister, you were the one who wanted me to write this, and you even said that it was very important. You wanted me to finish it with the highest quality. You're treating the product of 2 all-nighters like this. Let's ignore Rosa, who had dark circles under her eyes and was glaring at her older sister with deep hatred. She had worked so hard to write 30 pages over the course of an entire night, yet her older sister simply said, of course, so it was likely that a fight between the sisters would be unavoidable. However, a strange follower behind Rosa was shouting at her. Little Rosa in her dark form is also cute. Pink is indeed black when cut open. It would seem that while the wood spirits were becoming more and more human-like, there were also more and more strange people. It seemed that at some unknown time, the wood spirits had become abnormally popular. Bayana's strange adventuring team was no exception. There was actually a market for such a strange support team. Of course, there were also many people with deviant sexual orientations who had ulterior motive. As a result, under the watchful eyes of the plants, they were caught before the conspiracy could be carried out. After that, no one really knew whether the thorns or the roots would play out. However, unlike most ordinary wood spirits who were easy to get along with, Samantha was accustomed to treating others coldly. She would never waste words, and if she could solve a problem with one word, she would definitely not say two. If she did, it would be almost as if she was scolding others, and she would never smile. However, the strange part was that this behavior of hers had unexpectedly caused her to become incredibly popular. In fact, she even had the largest fan club in the world. Should I comment on this? No matter what world I was in, there would always be all sorts of gentlemen. Yet, such a cold-faced, venomous-tongued lowly had actually become the most popular. Little Samantha has worked hard too. I looked at Little Red, who was hugging Little Samantha and rubbing her cheeks with all her might. Little Samantha, who was trying her best to struggle but couldn't get rid of anti-monster strength dragon and was looking at me for help. I didn't know what to say. When I heard that the leader of the Wood Spirit Club was actually this female dragon, I wasn't surprised at all. I could only sigh that this former, fake lowly, was probably overflowing with maternal instincts again. I had to admit that appearances were sometimes quite important. For example, my undead army had saved Sulphur Mountain City and had a much better relationship with the ordinary living. However, there was still a gap between them and the ordinary living. It could only be said that they had a good relationship with the ordinary living. Yet, the wood spirits only needed to wave their hands, and a group of loyal adventurers would immediately follow them. It was said that the Wood Spirits fan club had more than 6 digits in number, and that they were even forming a personal guard squad. It seemed that they intended to become the Wood Spirits' labor force. I really didn't know what to say. When Samantha announced a toast, and the gentlemen were encouraging Samantha to sing a song to liven up the atmosphere, I felt as if I had been granted amnesty and began enjoying a luxurious dinner that I hadn't enjoyed in a long time. I indeed spent last night at Samantha's place, but this wasn't because Samantha and the others mistreated me. It was because the Wood Spirit's staple food was fruits and vegetables. Since they were so kind to treat me, I naturally couldn't refuse. I also didn't want to use my hard-earned justice points to buy some chicken or pork. So, I could only make do with the Wood Spirit's recipes. Unfortunately, their dishes were quite plain, and they didn't have any artificial additives or seasonings. They were quite filling, but the taste, to quote the silly cat, "I'd rather eat rats than grass. At least rats have some flavor." It seems that I'll need to think of a way to earn some gold coins to spend. I was quite curious as to who was capable of stealing money from me. Actually, losing my money pouch didn't really matter. After all, there were only 200 or 300 gold coins in it, which wasn't much to me. The only thing that bothered me was that some of my personal belongings had disappeared as well. Is it because you keep losing money that you don't bring any money with you? No, it's just that it's too troublesome to bring any money with me. It'll be fine once the Goddess of Wealth's banking business opens up. Yes, there were banks in this world, but rather than calling them financial institutions, they were more like safe. If you stored your money there, you could only take it out from there. You would also have to pay a storage fee, or else the bank owner would confiscate your money. Bring it with you? Dimensional storage equipment was expensive and rare, and it had limited space. There was also a limit to how heavy it could be. It wasn't enough to store any backup weapons, and gold coins were even more troublesome. In Legends, warriors who could easily carry several thousand gold coins were probably the strongest. Several thousand gold coins would weigh several dozen kilograms. An ordinary person would definitely be overloaded if they carried 10,000 gold coins. Casually carrying 100,000 gold coins would be impossible, unless they had a carriage to carry the gold coins with them. Of course, it could be said that credit coins had been used before. However, the banking business was usually handled by mercenary guilds, merchant guilds, and similar organizations. However, their business areas were limited, and not only was it far from convenient, it was also quite unreliable. The members of mercenary guilds were all mercenaries, so they weren't trustworthy to begin with, and merchant guilds would often go bankrupt. Even if they managed their businesses well, in the eyes of the major nobles, the nobles who had money but no private armies were nothing more than efficient cash machines. As long as they could find a reasonable reason, it wasn't uncommon for those so-called cash notes to become worthless paper overnight. The end result was that there were far too many precedents. Precious metals and magical metals were forever the hard currency of this world. After all, they could be used to create weapons and equipment, as well as to research alchemy and magic. They were expensive consumables, and Bayana's new banking business was basically using justice points as currency. Basically, you could use precious metals to exchange for justice points. Then, when you arrived at a certain location, you could use justice points to exchange for precious metals for consumption. In order to prevent people from using large amounts of gold coins to exchange for justice points, which would affect the price of justice points, the moment justice points were exchanged for justice points, they could only be used as currency. They couldn't be used to exchange for special resources. Although it sounded quite complicated, the content was actually quite simple. The true equivalent of justice points had already appeared. Justice points that had been exchanged for justice points now had the nickname wealth points. However, this didn't affect their true nature. And, thanks to the divine authority's guarantee, it seemed that justice points would truly be accepted by the entire world. If Bayana succeeded, perhaps wealth points would be able to replace heavy precious metals and become the world's universal currency. This wasn't any strange concept. However, in this era of feudal royalty, there weren't many that could accomplish such a thing. The nobles viewed their territories as their personal wealth, and they were used to collecting taxes and forcefully conscripting their territories. Even if there were some who were more open-minded, the frequent wars and changes in royalty forced them to gather all their wealth on the wheels of war. If they couldn't even protect their lives, breaking one or two agreements was nothing. Since the nobles, royalty, and merchants all regretfully tore apart the foundation of trust in the world's universal currency, most people lost trust in so-called paper money. Now that justice points were gradually being accepted by the people, Bayana naturally wouldn't miss this golden opportunity. Using the divine authority as a guarantee for the new generation's currency was a completely unprecedented attempt. It represented many unforeseeable futures. But as long as it succeeded, even if it was only half a success, it would definitely bring the definition of wealth to a whole new level. For example, the development of finance, futures, loans, and other industries would likely change many things at that time. Perhaps the first person in the Ale god system to become a main god won't be the god of fate or the moon goddess that everyone favors. Instead, it'll be the originally weak goddess of wealth. Of course, such an important societal change wouldn't happen overnight. At the very least, every country wouldn't allow a currency that was more trustworthy than their own official currency to be created. No matter how successful Bayana was, it was likely that this path would be filled with thorns. At the very least, many contract heroes were quite excited when they discovered that they didn't even need to exchange their justice points for rare treasures. They felt that they were on the right boat. Most contract heroes didn't think about the significance of the other changes. They were only happy for the sake of obtaining a tangible income. When they discovered that their lives had changed because of certain things, they could only passively accept it. However, some people had already seen through many things. In fact, they even viewed this as an opportunity. "Your Highness Roland, may I have a chat with you?" Roland was still that handsome magic knight who made others feel inferior. I couldn't help but recall some things as I looked at his handsome face, which was even more nervous than the last time I saw him. Actually, due to the wood spirit's strategic goal being leaked, I immediately suspected that there was a traitor among the adventurer's higher-ups. This outsider, who was able to directly enter the wood spirit's core region, became my primary suspect. His subordinates helped me find the undead mage traitor, but that didn't clear his name. In fact, it was the opposite. I treated him as my primary suspect for sacrificing a pawn to protect a treasure, and he received the special treatment of being monitored by plants 24/7. It wasn't until the end of the battle that the true traitor, Molly, was revealed that he was finally cleared of suspicion. As a high-level commander of the adventurers, he received a Silver Military Achievement Medal for his performance. But to be honest, I didn't expect that he would come looking for me after everything was over. After all, my true identity had been exposed. The undying Roland on the Calamity rankings was an undead emperor who had brought death and Yonya with him. The few high-level adventurers who learned of my true identity through their own channels were all quite reserved when they saw me. Not only did they take the initiative to chat with me, they would even sit up straight when I looked at them with pale faces and cold sweat. It was as if I was a man-eating tiger. Even for those who didn't know the truth, the Golden Military Medal would still cause them to be quite reserved. If they were any smarter, they would probably think about the reinforcements on the Calamity rankings and know what to do when facing this gold medal winner. But in the end, I didn't like this type of atmosphere. Recently, I had been incredibly free. Even if I was eating to my heart's content without caring about my image, nobody would pay attention to me. But now, this little fellow actually came looking for me of his own volition, which made me feel even more interested. I'm here to discuss cooperation. Obviously, some things weren't suitable to be discussed in public, so we found an empty room and had a good chat. In the end, we discovered that both of us seemed to be able to reach a common goal, which was why we signed a few agreements that weren't suitable to be revealed to the public. Well then, Your Highness, I'll be taking my leave first. I look forward to meeting you again in the Bardi capital. I watched as the Westwood Guardians' leader, Black Guardian Kai Zaloan, left in satisfaction. Although our first meeting wasn't pleasant, perhaps we would have many more chances to cooperate in the future. Such a person isn't simple at all. Perhaps he'll become famous in the future. Right, let's check if there's any information about this person in the game's history. There were far too many legends and records. Just remembering the names of epic heroes and other dimensional gods and demons would be enough to fill up a dictionary. Many times, a great hero or antagonist that sounded really powerful would only be briefly mentioned in the history. It would be impossible for me to completely record everything down. Still, if I had a name, it would only take me a bit more time to look up their deeds. Page 367, line 7. He's quite an interesting person. From a certain standpoint, the moment my system spoke, I felt that something was off about the situation. And so, I quickly flipped to that page and saw the record. Then I understood. Kai Zaloan, he's truly an interesting person. Bright red dragon blood filled the entire pool. The strange thing was that although I could smell blood, I didn't feel any discomfort from the smell of blood. This was the blood of an immemorial red dragon, a treasure that couldn't be bought with money. But, ever since I soaked myself in the blood pool, I lost all feeling in my body. I felt numb and swollen, and my body itched to the point where I wanted to skin myself with a knife. But the next instant I lost all feeling in my body. Sensory Isolation Service. Charge 10 no 100 justice points. You're taking advantage of my misfortune. Can't you have some conscience? In that case, cancel this service and return the justice points? Are you sure? 3-2. You win. Everything returned to silence. Since my physical body wouldn't be able to move around for the time being, I focused on my spoils of war in the frigid winter earth. From a certain standpoint, as a victor who had successfully picked up corpses, I had obtained many spoils of war. However, digesting them wouldn't be so easy. It was enough that I could only watch from the sidelines once. Now, what I needed to do was quite clear. Hurry up and become stronger. Chapter 352. When a world's basic structure consisted of the four elements of wind, fire, water, and earth, rather than the microscopic particles of a certain world, then this world would no longer be related to science. However, there were some things in common. For example, intelligent life forms' methods of researching the nature of the world. This was determined by intelligent life forms' different yet similar ways of thinking and evolution. If science was humanity's exploration and development of Earth and nature, then magic would be the mage's understanding and development of the world's essence. Since this world's basic structure consisted of the four elements, no matter how far magical civilization had advanced, elemental magic would always be the foundation and technical reserve for many types of magic. It was just like how a certain world's technology had already reached the age of spaceflight, while the pinnacle of physics had actually reached the microscopic world. Yet, the theories and research results of these two worlds were actually able to complement each other and help each other out. The most famous of these two worlds was probably the theory of relativity and its subsidiary research. His explanation of spacetime and gravity was the foundation of modern aviation, while his analysis and understanding of the microscopic world, such as electron movement. This world's truth-seekers were all like this as well. They would boldly make inferences, carefully verify, and gradually analyze the nature of the world. This was the only goal that every mage had in common. Sometimes, understanding the microscopic nature of the world seemed to be nothing more than a useless theory, but it could actually result in the rapid advancement of practical technology, magic. Perhaps nobody would have expected that in that sudden battle, the person who gained the most wasn't Roland, who was currently bathing in dragon blood. Nor was it the goddess of wealth, who had received an explosive increase in her wealth points and believers as well as pain in her divine soul. Instead, it was the loser of this battle, Zero. In the Taiko Republic's language, Hasi meant amber. And in the middle of the snowy mountains was the core of the ice plain, Hasi Castle. The ancient ice castle was decorated in a historical style. Unlike Aso, who had been born as a slave, Zero's era was the Tark Republic's most prosperous era. The decorations had sharp edges, geometric patterns on the towers, divine beasts with rings in their mouths on the main doors, ice crystal waves on the frozen rivers, and lifelike shoals of fish. These were all remnants of ancient civilizations. In the garden, maids made of ice were slowly moving about, serving guests who were also made of ice. Artists were currently performing. Apart from the normal sounds of people and the music that should be playing, this castle seemed to still be in operation. However, in the empty hall of ice that had been lost in history, there was only a lonely throne. The master of the castle was sleeping on that throne, her long and slender dress extending all the way to the bottom of the stairs. Zero was in a deep sleep. Her appearance and attire were exactly the same as when she was in the mortal plane, but there was now a small golden crown on her forehead. However, she did not seem to be in a good state at the moment. The left side of her body was filled with bone-piercing cold air and white frost, while the right side was burning fiercely. There seemed to be a dividing line in the middle that isolated all these changes so that they would not interfere with each other. The ancient emperor slept there, just like he had for the past 1,000 years. Only, at this time, more icicles extended from one side of the throne, while the other side began to melt, as if hinting that some changes were happening. In this world where everything had stopped, time was meaningless. After an unknown amount of time, the outside world was still covered in ice and snow, and the sky outside the window was still gray. But suddenly, a soft sigh echoed in the empty hall. As expected, that's the only possibility. I never expected that I would be taught a lesson by a junior. Is this one of the foundational natural laws of the world? Although she was asking herself this question, she didn't need to answer it herself. At Zero's level, her knowledge was already capable of changing the world. Energy is actually the law of conservation? For the master of this dimensional plane, words were power. Her understanding was the truth. The moment she said this, the entire world lit up. A golden light extended from the throne, and many things were changed wherever the light reached. Observation existed. Under the gaze of the great emperor, the world was changed. It was as if an invisible brush was painting over the world. The snow-white walls of ice and snow were now covered in the color of dust, as if they had been baptized by history. The doll-like ice-made skin now had the color of flesh and blood. Apart from her crystal-clear eyes, she was basically a living person. The ice flowers in the garden were dyed in all sorts of colors. The ice fish jumping in the waves finally reappeared in the water. The wheel of time, which had stopped for thousands of years, began to spin again. The surroundings of the ancient castle had completely changed. The original snowy mountains had turned into lush green mountains. The frozen wasteland was once again dyed with a yellowish-brown color. The amber of ice had turned into a bright pearl among the lofty mountains. Is this the feeling of breathing? Is this the melody of heartbeats? The person who had changed the most was probably Zero herself. Her translucent skin now had white flesh and a blood-red color. Her incorporeal dress had transformed into solid silk. Thump, thump, thump. Zero's heartbeat, which had stopped for tens of thousands of years, suddenly became alive again. Joy and nervousness spread through her veins. An indescribable change was happening to Zero's body. Her accumulated power over tens of thousands of years had been replenished by something else in this world. It was as if she was a stubborn rock that had been transformed into gold. Perhaps she would still be an undead emperor, but the current her was neither dead nor alive. She was no longer her past self. Zero? No, from today onwards I shall be known as Conservation. Only the equally ancient archons knew that in that era, naming oneself after one's greatest achievement was a personal convention that abandoned the zero in one's name. Ice river, ice snow, frozen sleep, beneath the ice, and zero. These represented the 5 stages of Zero's life. The name Zero had been with her for the longest time. Today, she had finally changed her name yet again. However, the incomprehensible part was that the image of ice on the left and fire on the right still hadn't disappeared. Her soft and smooth skin was now split into 2 halves. The left side of her skin was white, while the right side was crimson. The left side of her hair was silver white, while the right side of her hair was fiery orange-red. At her level, even though she could easily change her appearance, she ultimately decided to retain this unique characteristic of her appearance. This shall serve as a souvenir. But suddenly, she paused as she had just woken up from her joy. She recalled the projection clone she had lost. It was likely that Conservation was currently analyzing it. Since she was able to obtain information on Conservation and greatly improve herself, that meant that Conservation would also be able to analyze her clone and obtain the same level of information. I don't think so. It's just a clone. If it doesn't have a deep understanding of heat, it shouldn't be able to reach such a level in a place that she had never expected. In a small world that she had just visited, there was also a painting brush that was truly coloring the world. The white ocean was painted blue, the pale sunlight was painted orange-red, and the running wolves were painted green. While Conservation's physical body was in a deep sleep, that man's will descended upon Conservation's territory and casually changed this monotonous world. And the body that Conservation's will had descended upon and was diligently coloring the world was the lost incarnation of a certain undead emperor. No wonder this evolution is ranked higher than dragon blood. I've truly picked up a treasure this time. I've obtained the key that I've been missing the most. From a certain standpoint, there was no foundational difference between undead mages and mages. Unlike bloodline warlocks, who were born with the ability to cast spells, undead mages were also scholars who pursued the truth. They were skilled at transforming knowledge and theories into actual power. If one had to find a single difference, it would be that undead mages generally had lower limit. Not only were they unafraid of the dangers and taboos of ordinary people, but more importantly, They focused their research on life itself. Why are these limbs working like this? Why can't a person move without this organ? Then, can I just put all these pieces of flesh together and be able to move? And just what exactly is a soul? When it came to the more detailed aspects, due to the fact that there was a limit to one's energy and knowledge, it was just like learning a certain subject to a certain degree. Undead mages naturally branched out into different branches of research. There was no such thing as being superior or inferior. Just like how technology wouldn't make any less money than top-notch physics, an archmage specializing in undead calamity forbidden spells wouldn't necessarily be able to defeat an alchemist specializing in the creation of abominations. If one really wanted to compare who was superior or inferior, it would depend on how far they had progressed in their respective paths. Only then would they reach the levels of myth, semigod, and so on. Since they were all mages, just like how an ordinary mage's truth-level research results were the only way to become a semi-god mage, if one wished to achieve something on the path of a necromancer, he would also have to reach the peak of his own research field. Once an undead mage reached a certain level, it would be even more difficult for them than an ordinary mage. Perhaps it was because the world was unfriendly toward the undead that it was the most difficult for the undead to advance in power level. Ordinary semigod mages were equivalent to myth-ranked undead. They were already the authorities in their own field of research. Meanwhile, undead semigod emperors weren't simply the authorities in their own field of research. They had even created their own field of research that only they existed in. They were the sole owner of a certain blank space in their field of research, which meant that they had reached a level where the world didn't recognize them. Yet, they just happened to exist in reality, which made them the enemies of the world. This was also the foundational reason why undead emperors were able to enjoy the treatment of other evil gods and gods from other dimensions, even though they were only semi-gods. From a certain standpoint, they had indeed ventured far too far into forbidden territory, and had already reached the most dangerous boundary. But no matter how far one ventured, one would still have to start from a foundational research topic. If my foundational research topic was the quality of one's soul, then judging from the mysteries contained in my projection, Zero's research topic was the temperature of one's life. Why is one's soul 21 grams? Why is the body temperature of most life forms, mammals, birds, etc., fixed at 37 degrees Celsius? In some ways, these questions were similar. They all seemed like simple questions that could be easily answered. But if one wanted to answer them, one would have to ask all the way to the very core of the world, the essence of the soul and the secrets of life. That's right. From the very start, the undead mages who researched the structure of zombies and the strengthening of ice dragons were all idiots who had been blinded by power and had gone down the wrong path. When the four major elements reached the extreme, they would return to the very essence of the element. That was how Frigid Maw's foundational magic and simple yet powerful forbidden spells came into existence. Meanwhile, undead magic started from researching the living and the dead, and the final research topic was still the same: the soul and life. For me to be able to progress so far in the study of souls, apart from my own determination and the accumulated knowledge of two lives, my soul, which would never fall into the cycle of reincarnation, could be considered unparalleled in the world. And in order to reach the level of undead emperor that would be impossible to reach through normal means, apart from the 99% of hard work, the 1% of talent was also necessary. Although this sounded rather depressing and negative, since undead emperors were unreachable through normal means, it would indeed be impossible to reach undead emperors without countless geniuses blessed by the heavens. No matter how hard you worked, it would be impossible to reach undead emperors. Perhaps you were just a tiny bit away from undead emperors, but that was the difference between victory and defeat. For example, if I didn't have the experience of tempering my soul in the cycle of reincarnation, personally witnessing the essence of the soul in the cycle of reincarnation, singing and bathing in the river Styx, and repeatedly repairing my damaged soul, it would be impossible for me to reach the level of undead emperors. As long as there were enough undead and the environment was good, it would still be possible to have 0.00001% talent. Perhaps I should call them geniuses blessed by the heavens, or miraculous geniuses. But if they wanted to temper their talents to the extreme, to the point where they would need to use a genius blessed by the heavens in order to win, it would probably take hundreds of years of hard work, as well as luck from winning a great prize. Naturally, there would be very few undead emperors. Since it was far too difficult to reach the level of impossible to reach, theoretically speaking, it was impossible for an undead emperor to reach the level of undead emperors younger than 2,000 years old. There were exceptions? I wasn't even 300 years old yet I had already reached such a level? From a certain standpoint, I had to thank my system. Without her assistance, I wouldn't have been able to accumulate so much power, nor would I have been able to reach this level so quickly. Not only that, I also had the knowledge of 2 lives, the greatest cheat of all. In the field of research, looking at things from a different perspective would cause the scenery to be completely different. Changing one's way of thinking would be the most difficult part. How many geniuses with astonishing talent would be stuck at the moment right before they reach the level of undead emperors? I definitely wasn't mirroring that silly cat. Her problem was different from most myth-ranked undead. Getting back to the main topic, from a certain standpoint, Zero was doubtlessly a genius blessed by the heavens as well. She had spent countless years to reach this level. As for her age, fine then, just like how I didn't care about Harloise, Little Red, and other ancient elves' ages and immemorial dragons' ages, as a gentleman, I shouldn't care about these ladies whose ages were calculated in units of 10,000 years. Yep, it definitely wasn't because I was worried about accidentally thinking too much and letting the silly cat bite my head off. Nor was it because I had recently been so poor that I needed the silly cat's help in order to not starve. Zero, as a pet, actually had a secret stash of money. I couldn't believe it. Getting back to the main topic, Zero was a ghost. Her natural talent was the ability to steal away the heat of anyone she came into contact with. This wasn't a rare talent, nor was she a special high-level undead. Her growth rate and combat strength would be extremely limited. However, there was something slightly different about Zero's ability to steal heat. While other ghosts would steal as much heat as they could when they came into contact with them, Zero would meticulously divide the amount of heat into units, and use her precise calculations to do all sorts of tricks. Perhaps this talent of Zero's wouldn't be very useful in battle, but her incredibly precise control over energy allowed her to make tremendous progress in her research on negative energy. She finally reached the pinnacle of her research, and what truly helped her reach the unreachable realm of undead emperors was her research on the effects of energy on living creatures. With her natural talent, all changes in energy could be seen at a glance. She was able to meticulously observe the changes in the temperature of ordinary living creatures. In fact, she was even able to create the negative energy temperature of the negative energy magnetic field around undead creatures. With her special vision, she was able to determine a person's or undead strength with just a single glance. She was one of the top undead emperors in her research on how to use negative energy to drive undead creatures. Her undead army was a true perpetual motion machine and a source of negative energy radiation. She was one of the scariest existences in a protracted battle. And when she viewed energy as the source of all living creatures' existence, she also gained the ability to transform into energy and split energy. Zero's most frightening aspect was her perfect control over energy. Fortunately, only her main body was capable of using her full power. Roland had only faced less than 0.1% of her true power. However, this was where Zero stopped. She only knew about the effects of energy on living creatures and undead, but she was unable to understand the effects that energy had on the entire world. This wasn't because she was stupid or conservative. It was because undead mages' vision had always been focused on the soul and life. They had no interest in the environment that was made up of inorganic matter. And if they ignored the changes in energy in the environment, how could they possibly obtain the truth from a single individual's research? Unfortunately, most research in this world of magic was based on the idealism of, I can see it, so it exists. It would be incredibly difficult to obtain the truth. Perhaps someone had warned her before, or perhaps she had learned some secrets from literature. But for undead emperors at their level, their inner understanding of the real world was so different from the real world that they could even project projections to affect the real world. It would be incredibly difficult to shatter past beliefs and reorganize them. Finally, when a similar existence used the real world to viciously slap her in the face in a way that her theories couldn't explain, she felt pain and annoyance, but this also woke her up. So, energy is conserved. Energy can be transferred from the sun and moon to plants, from plants to humans, and from human corpses to nature. Perhaps our world isn't isolated after all. Negative energy can also be transferred and converted. Perhaps the end of the negative energy that drives the undead to move is the positive energy that allows living creatures to move. But after she changed her beliefs, her world finally took another step forward. The conversion between negative energy and positive energy broke through the boundaries between life and death. Fortunately, undead emperors were already the highest level of undead. Otherwise, it was likely that they would have to create a special title and rank for undead emperors. From a certain standpoint, this was the result of Roland's research. It was the crystallization of both undead emperors' knowledge. And when Zero evolved into conservation, because of this, Roland, who had obtained a portion of Zero's research results from Asso's incarnation, used a different method to supplement his own theories, and obtained even more. Originally, it would have been impossible for Roland to analyze Zero's incarnation. However, Asso had given him a large amount of undead knowledge. Although Asso's knowledge wasn't necessarily superior to Roland's, as the true and exclusive research results were still sealed away, Asso's knowledge was the standard teaching materials in the Tark Republic, as well as the common research theories used by high-level undead mages. Zero himself had also grown up step by step through these theories. With this knowledge, it was as if he had the key to opening a door. That was why he was able to successfully analyze Zero's incarnation. The world's energy cycle has been reconstructed. This isn't the Earth that only has positive energy. The cycle of negative energy is one of the foundational reasons for the existence of souls. This is the true secret of this magical world. Zero's eyes are just too useful. What I see isn't necessarily reality. I've been limited by my past belief. This isn't the purely physical world of the past. This is a world constructed from both the spiritual and the physical. While Zero has been trapped by this world's beliefs, I've also been limited by the scientific knowledge that I previously viewed as a treasure. At this moment, the previously shattered undead's crown was reconstructed. However, unlike the completely repaired ice treader, this soul imprint of undead magic was the crystallization of the three undead emperors' knowledge. However, this soul imprint had already taken a completely different path. An even more arduous path was now before Roland. This soul imprint was the face of a man. However, it was split in half along the middle. One side was a skeleton, while the other side was a living person. The dead side was smiling, while the living side was crying. This soul imprint had broken through the boundaries of life and death and understood the very essence of souls. He was. Since he's mastered the cycle of life and death, then the judge of the dead is the most suitable for him. In that case, let's call him the River Styx judge. None of the undead emperors were easy to deal with. 0 was able to obtain inspiration from Roland and improve. As the victor, Roland obtained even more. It was just that he was limited by his power level, so it wasn't completely obvious. However, some of his gains could be seen. At the same time that Roland achieved a breakthrough, my system also gave me a notification. The power that I had been looking forward to for so long had finally arrived. Congratulations to host for successfully repairing your soul imprint. You have awakened the semi-god level racial talent, Gaze of the Hell God. System notification. This talent is extremely dangerous. Please use it with caution. System notification. This talent has the potential to evolve further. Please use it with caution. Chapter 353. When I woke up from my long slumber, although I was still unable to move, the world in my eyes was completely different. If I had a mirror, I would be able to see that my eyes were completely different from before. One side of my eyes was now black and white, while the other side was now black and white. It was as if the two halves of the Taiji symbol were the two halves of the yin-yang symbol, which was quite frightening. My vision was even more strange. On one side was a world of energy that seemed like an infrared image. Red, yellow, orange, and other warm colors could be seen everywhere. On the other side was a world filled with dried bones and black mud, as if all the filth of the world was right in front of me. Fortunately, my eyes returned to normal after I cancelled the stare of the Hell God. Otherwise, I really would have to find a cloth to cover my eyes and cosplay as some unlucky person who had been imprisoned for 10,000 years. I suddenly felt that this style would be quite cool, but it would be quite embarrassing to have to bare my upper body. It would be even more embarrassing if I died halfway through the classic line of "You're all seeking your own deaths." I took a deep breath and discovered that more than half of the dragon blood in my blood pool had been consumed. Also, something mysterious seemed to have happened to my body. System. At a time like this, I really needed to find an expert. At the very least, her interface would always be able to use precise numbers and words to help me understand my own situation. Unfortunately, although a status window popped up, my racial talents and stats kept changing, making it impossible for me to see them clearly. It seemed that they were still changing. It seems that it's still early. It would seem that my physical body was still evolving. I took a deep breath and intended to send my consciousness into my frigid winter earth again. However, I received a response from my system. Your physical body is about to enter the adolescent stage. Please choose the direction of your evolution. System notification. Please pay attention to your choice. Once you make a choice, it will be impossible to change it. I paused in surprise for a moment upon hearing this, but then my system directly gave me a bunch of information that helped me come to a sudden realization. Arbiter bloodline. Strength. 19 agility. 19 constitution. 19 intelligence. 29 will. 19 charm. 19 talent abilities. War Angel form, Original Sin Demon form. Overall evaluation. Double Diamond bloodline. Recommended job class. Order Knight/Chaos Witch King. System evaluation. An Arbiter bloodline that exists on the border between Order and Chaos. It doesn't belong to any faction, but it can coexist with any faction. Perhaps he isn't the strongest, but he definitely has the most potential. To be honest, I had always found it rather strange. Even though my bloodline was evaluated as a double diamond bloodline, in actual combat, it was far inferior to the Titan Giant's quasi-diamond bloodline. In fact, it was much weaker than Little Red's immemorial dragon bloodline. Now, I had a rough idea of what the problem was. From a certain standpoint, the system was the same as me. Although it never lied, it would often say things that would tempt people to misunderstand and fall for it. This time, it was the last sentence in the description that, he's not the strongest, but he's definitely the one with the most potential. When a teacher praised a student for having potential, there might be a subtext that said, He really isn't much right now. So, what the system gave me was just an embryo. As for how far it would go, it would depend on my future development and choices. And so, intentionally or unintentionally, the system still tricked me. At the very least, what it gave me back then wasn't the complete Arbiter bloodline, but rather the Arbiter bloodline's infant bloodline. This was also why my physical body had always been in an infant state. It was just like a child who had just finished his childhood education. Whether or not I would become an athlete, an artist, a musician, and so on would all depend on the child's long-term learning and training. A child should first learn how to run and how to talk. This world had never been balanced. Just like how the sports and intelligence geniuses in my previous world were all so easily capable of achieving things that ordinary people would never be able to achieve in their entire lives. Black people also had sports abilities in certain areas that other races would never be able to achieve no matter how hard they tried. The differences between the races in this world were even greater, and the imbalance was even more obvious. Beastmen were naturally skilled in melee combat, elves were skilled in archery and magic, dragons were skilled in both magic and martial arts, but their growth was slow. Undead were born with a natural affinity for negative energy. The only race that had average development was humans, who seemed to be the best at everything. A physical body with the most potential? A stairway to the strongest? Nobody knew what type of power would be most suitable for you, what type of combat style you would use to reach that level, or what type of natural talent ability you wanted the most. It was just like how the so-called most potential would give you a chance to choose, creating a physical body and natural talent that you desired the most. Give up on at least 2 racial talent. Give me a direction to strengthen. The more detailed, the better. System notification. Congratulations on graduating from elementary school. Now it's time for you to go to middle school. Average development during infancy, and I'll have to make a choice during adolescence? From my system's information, I learned that the Arbiter bloodline was just like the perverts of insects. It would undergo a breakthrough mutation when it reached a bottleneck. And now, it was time for me to make a choice based on my combat experience. Choice? Choice? If there's a choice, then there'll definitely be a choice to give up. If there's a choice that's the most important, then there'll definitely be a choice that's the least important. Indeed, I wanted to be as agile as the elves, as strong as the beastmen, as naturally attracted to negative energy like the undead, and be able to control negative energy at will. I wanted to be as close to positive energy as an angel, and be as instinctive as breathing. But this wouldn't do. Even if my unreasonable bloodline ability really succeeded, it would only make up for my flaws and make my original strong points mediocre. War Angel Incarnation, Original Sin Demon Incarnation, Sword of Order, Titan Giant's Body, Shadow Feet, Divine Child, and Chaos Barrier. Do I have to give up on more than 2? Strengthen? Which one should I strengthen? I went through my past natural talent abilities and considered which one would be the most useful to me, as well as what type of combat style I should adopt in the future. However, I was momentarily troubled. Not a single one of my current abilities was weak, but if I looked back at my past abilities, there would obviously be differences. The War Angel Incarnation and Original Sin Demon Incarnation would definitely be kept. No matter if it was in actual combat or my Frigid Winter Earth Creation ability, they would both be incredibly effective. And I felt that since they were 2 foundational abilities that came with my physical body, they probably wouldn't be cancelled. The Divine Child ability would allow me to easily activate the Divine Book of Descent, which was also my trump card, so of course I wouldn't cancel it. In that case, let's start eliminating the abilities that I had used the least. Of course, I could always ask the Living Library Harlois for advice. Shadow Feet is the least used out of all the natural talent abilities. It's the ability to escape through the shadow plane. Although using it can save my life, it's the equivalent of throwing myself into another plane. I'll probably need to think of a way to return, and it's highly unlikely that I'll be able to return in a short period of time. That's why I've never used it before. But since it's an ability to escape, perhaps I'll need to use it at some point. Is it even possible for you to escape? Weren't you still eager to try the Titan giant right before you? I think you should have faced your true self long ago and become a berserker. Humph, that's only because I wasn't in a situation where I was certain to die. Otherwise, I definitely would have escaped for you to see. As a mage, it was perfectly normal for them to run if they couldn't win. Mages had a much slower growth period than other job classes. If they wanted to go on an adventure, they would definitely prepare 2 or 3 specialized, tactical magic spells. Harlois saying that I should become a berserker was no different from slandering me as a brainless idiot. No, I think that as long as you're forced to your limits, you'll still turn into a mad dog mode and fight to the death. Back when Aso cast a forbidden spell on you, you were still able to escape to the shadow plane, but you ended up burning your soul in order to die together with him. Just think about it, have you ever tried to escape after all these years? It's possible that I've never tried to escape. From this standpoint, you're just like those inflexible tin cans. When I said this, I recalled the teachings of a certain so-called strongest Holy Knight teacher when I was younger. He basically nagged me for more than 3 hours every day. It was almost like brainwashing. We Holy Knights will never despair. As long as we fight to the very end, even if we're destined to die, we'll make a worthwhile sacrifice. Actually, the greatest advantage of the Holy Knight job class was that they were nearly immune to fear and despair magic. Not only that, my team was used to having Holy Knights do the most dangerous jobs. In fact, since there were far too many precedents, when Bayana ridiculed the Holy Knight class for being a martyr fanatic and a suicide syndrome, I was unable to retort at all. Personally, I didn't believe that my childhood teachings would affect someone for the rest of their life. But honestly speaking, if I was forced to the brink again, I probably wouldn't even think about escaping as long as there was even the slightest possibility of victory. The fact that I hadn't used my shadow feat even once was probably the most obvious evidence. It's not necessary to strengthen my escape ability? For you, it's indeed not necessary. It's not like you'll ever escape. Besides, you're the undying Roland. Even if you die, you can always start over again. Alright then, aside from the first reason, the second to last reason was, apart from the shadow feat for escaping, the second least frequently used ability is the ability to summon a holy sword, the ability to summon a holy sword. I had only used this ability a few times at the very beginning, but I hadn't used it much after that. It was a small matter that I could only use this ability once per day, and it couldn't be used for very long. But my greatest regret was that I didn't lack weapons. Pale Justice, Roland Holy Sword, and Undying Killer Warhammer were all excellent weapons capable of carrying the power of holy light and law. Although I had given the god equipment Roland Holy Sword to Renée, ever since the silly cat evolved to the point where she possessed the abilities of Calamity Chill and Hibernation Chill, the Ice Calamity that Harlois had transformed into became my first choice. In fact, as my ice magic improved, Irene Bela's buffs on ice magic, and that fatal Calamity Chill, the Ice Calamity that Harlois transformed into was no weaker than the god equipment Roland Holy Sword in my hand. In that case, the conclusion was quite obvious. It was also quite obvious what I needed to give up. You don't lack melee attacks. A holy sword that only uses the power of holy light and law will be useless to you. Harlois' words were logical, but why did I feel like she only wanted to eliminate her competitors and become my one and only beloved sword? Fine then, since I accidentally revealed my true thoughts, I would probably have to think of a way to remove her from my head. Recently, she had actually learned how to make her fangs act like drills, which gave me even more of a headache. Melee combat abilities are meaningless to you, and escape abilities are meaningless to you. The conclusion is already clear. What is the talent ability that you use the most? Of course, I still had to ask. Titan body, diamond racial talent. Your physical body contains the original power of the Titans. Your skin is becoming more and more like Titan metal. All damage and debuffs will be reduced by 30%. All damage will be reduced by 5. Chaos barrier, gold racial talent. Protect your existence from the pressure of a divine domain or soul world. Reduce the effectiveness of will-type abilities and illusions. Yep, these two pure defensive passive talents were the ones that I used the most. The former protected my physical body, while the latter protected my soul. It was only by combining these two talents that I was able to survive to this day. As I looked at the word Titan in Titan body, I mysteriously recalled the Titan incarnation that survived even a true god's self-destruction. The deepest impression they had left on me was their outstanding defensive abilities. With the existence of the frigid winter earth world, with my accomplishments in ice, death, holy light, and law, I didn't lack offensive power or offensive method. However, perhaps my weakness was still my defensive abilities. If I was trampled to death on the battlefield, no matter how many abilities I had, I would still die with a grudge. My frozen flame armor, which was nearly invincible against Omdoroken, was actually my glass porcupine armor that Omdoroken was afraid of. If I met an idiot who really rushed up to me and shattered my ice armor, I would probably have to think of a way to prevent myself from being frozen into eternal slumber. Only by staying alive would I have hope. Only then would I have the possibility of turning the tables. Perhaps strengthening my defensive abilities is the most suitable path for me. I don't recommend that you choose this path of evolution. Without the assistance of the Titan incarnation, you won't be able to evolve to your desired level. And once you choose this path, you won't be able to change it. System notification: it's your fault for not completing your quest. Maybe next time. Although I didn't say anything nice about it, from a certain standpoint, I could see the system's painstaking efforts. The system had given me a quest during my duel against Zero, probably because Zero's knowledge system would be the greatest supplement for me. It would be a great opportunity for me to complete my undead element soul imprint. Meanwhile, the Titan incarnation was probably the most suitable path for me to improve my physical body. The immemorial red dragon bloodline that I had obtained with Little Red's assistance was probably nothing more than a consolation prize. Just from my recent battles, it was easy to tell that the physical strength of dragons was on a completely different level from the Titan incarnations. If I chose a dragon bloodline, although it would greatly increase my physical body's strength, and perhaps I would even be able to obtain the dragon's attacks, pure defensive abilities would likely be far inferior to the Titan incarnation's bloodline. I was hesitating as well. I had worked so hard to get to this point. It would be far too much of a pity if I took the wrong path. I could already guess what abilities a dragon bloodline would have. After all, since dragons were of the most basic nature, there were far too many true dragon bloodline hybrids. There were also many dragon bloodline warlocks in this world, and the abilities of those dragon bloodlines had already been thoroughly researched by others. Dragon bloodline would greatly increase my stat. Although it would be quite useful for ordinary dragon bloodline warlocks with weak bodies, my basic stats were far too high, so the increase would probably be limited. I didn't really look forward to it. Dragon scale armor would allow my body to grow scales that would increase my physical and magical defense. If I hadn't met the Titan incarnations before, I would have said that they would be impenetrable and incredibly practical. However, I already had the powerful talent Titan incarnation, and I had also seen the Titan incarnation's disgustingly tough defensive ability. How could I possibly be satisfied with just this? Dragon wings would give me the ability to fly. This seems simple, but the ability to fly would forever be the most practical. Unfortunately, I already had the War Angel transformation. As my power level increased, the number of times I could transform would increase as well. This ability to fly would be completely useless to me. Dragon Breath would be an incredibly powerful attack ability. It would have a wide AoE, powerful attack, and quick to activate. However, just as I mentioned before, I didn't lack any other offensive abilities. This ability would probably be of little value to me. Dragon Claws and Dragon Tail would increase my melee combat abilities. To be honest, this would be the most useless ability. I was no warrior monks. I was a swordsman, so melee combat abilities would be completely meaningless. The claws of dragons would actually affect the agility and habit of using swords. If I really grew claws, teeth, and a tail, I would be more worried about that legendary male than I was worried about being disfigured. And it was that half-dragon man who had inexplicably tamed a divine beast. Dragons were his family. He would definitely be capable of doing anything. The more I thought about it, the more I regretted it. This dragon bloodline evolution wouldn't just be useless anymore. In a way, it would be dangerous, but suddenly, I saw Harlois and Irene Bela, who were forced to soak in dragon blood together with me due to our soul contract. A very zombie-like idea suddenly appeared in my mind. If this was possible, then the dragon bloodline evolution wouldn't be useless anymore. Instead, it would truly be a shortcut to greatly increase my combat strength. And so, I hesitantly made my request to my system. The only response I received was a long silence. It seemed that my system was calculating something. However, I was delighted. What I was most afraid of the most was being rejected. This doubtlessly meant that my idea was feasible. 150,000 fate points. A refund for any overpayment. That's impossible. This is a fixed price. I was instantly furious. I had accumulated 143,451 fate points, and I was stuck at this price. This bastard was obviously trying to scam me. Even if you remake your body, it wouldn't be this expensive, would it? Also, why do you have to stick to the upper limit of my total fate points? Don't think that I don't know why it's a whole number every time. It's because you're taking the bigger part and then taking the smaller part. You think it's too expensive? You can find someone else. All right then, this condescending tone and line instantly caused me to imagine a certain bastard picking his nose while looking at me out of the corner of his eye. I really wanted to find someone else, but this was a monopoly. How could I find someone else? Not only that, this was a complete monopoly that was impossible to turn back from. You were already using its system. Did you really want to not patch it and buy its follow-up services? It would have all sorts of bugs and viruses that could kill you. You win. What if it's not enough? Can you owe me? I had pretty much figured it out. This bastard was obviously trying to suck all my fate points out of me. It would seem that it was even trying to force me to do ridiculous daily quests. No. I paused in surprise upon hearing this. I never expected that this bastard would actually refuse. Could it be that it actually had a conscience this time? Was it really only willing to give me a reasonable price without owing me? If that was really the case, then what should I do? Was I supposed to give up on this idea that I had worked so hard to come up with? I'm really not willing to just barely use my physical body to evolve like this. You can owe me, but you'll have to pay me back with justice points. But first, you have to give me the 2,300 justice points you have right now as a deposit for something that I want. Alright then, I had still underestimated a certain black-bellied system. At this moment, I mysteriously recalled a certain pitiful man who had been booked by a certain woman before he even received his salary. At such a time, as a proper man, he would probably only be able to raise his head and sigh, before lowering his head and begging for mercy. You win, but you should at least leave me 100 justice points as pocket money. You should know that it's quite difficult for me to earn justice points. But at such a time, no matter how pitiful you sounded, your opponent wouldn't let you off so easily. 50. No need to thank me. Pay me the rest within half a year. Otherwise, I'll give you 13 out of 10. You understand. Chapter 354. It's already been 7 days. Why haven't they come out yet? Little Red was quite displeased. As time went on, her mood worsened. All dragons lacked patience, especially the red dragons, who were famous for being arrogant, disobedient, and uncommunicative. Dragons were a general term. Every type of dragon was vastly different. Before the dragons broke free from the eternal holy war, the red, white, black, green, and blue dragons were viewed as creations of the Chaos Goddess and were considered subordinates of the Chaos faction. Considering how the Chaos faction was famous for its bad temper, in a way, the color dragons were quite difficult to get along with. The red dragons of the fire element were hot-tempered and arrogant. They were extremely sensitive to the authority of their territory. The blue dragons of the thunder element were extremely warlike. They especially liked to hunt other intelligent creatures as food. The black dragons of the corrosion and darkness element were truly cunning and evil. They were also the greediest of all the dragons. Green dragons and white dragons were also color dragons, but they weren't particularly strong. White dragons were even more famous for being mentally retarded. That was why red dragons, black dragons, and blue dragons were all major species among the dragon species. Their large numbers would have a large effect on the entire world. If they appeared anywhere in the mortal plane, it was likely that an air defense alarm would be sounded. When the dragon species exiled the red dragons and black dragons into the underground world, many species that had been harmed by dragons were so excited that they celebrated overnight. Yep, a dragon disaster. This was now viewed as a natural disaster. It was a natural disaster that was unpredictable and unstoppable. The moment it happened, it would definitely cause a tremendous amount of damage. Dragons that only happened to come out and rob people didn't count as a dragon disaster. True dragon disasters were often viewed by the victims as the shame of their entire species. However, there was nothing they could do about it and could only let it happen on its own. Little Red was an immemorial red dragon. She was already powerful enough to take over an entire city and easily kill off any ordinary semigod. Then, if a dragon that had experienced the primordial divine war decided to do evil, who would be able to stop her? Not to mention, immemorial red dragons weren't even at the peak of all dragons. There were also supreme immemorial dragons whose ages were immeasurable. At their level, even true gods might not dare to provoke them. Dragon egg, infant, youth, adult, old dragon, immemorial dragon, primordial dragon, and supreme immemorial dragon. All the previous errors have been corrected. It was said that the Wood Elves' Holy Land had been occupied by an immemorial green dragon. Even now, the Wood Elves had no intention of handing it over. That green dragon had already treated the Wood Elves' Holy Land as a place to retire. Meanwhile, the Shield Dwarves' royal family accidentally broke through a certain seal, and an immemorial shadow dragon, a dragon species similar to black dragons, appeared. The immemorial shadow dragon then occupied the Shield Dwarves' royal palace for countless years, and even enslaved the Shield Dwarves' descendants as slaves. The once powerful mega-empire, the Kingdom of Gulbai, was destroyed by the rage of an immemorial red dragon. The Supreme Red Dragon was ranked 7th on the Calamity rankings, and the Supreme Shadow Dragon was ranked 33rd on the Calamity rankings. As for the Supreme Red Dragon that destroyed a mega-empire by itself, it hadn't appeared for far too long and wasn't currently on the Calamity rankings. But if it did appear, it would definitely be ranked in the top 10. Since it was far too dangerous, all supreme immemorial dragons of the color dragons received the same treatment. Actually, there wasn't much of a difference between immemorial dragons and immemorial dragons. Powerful dragons such as immemorial red dragons would be able to fight against immemorial white dragons. Although immemorial red dragons would most likely lose, if they reached the highest standard of supreme immemorial dragons, they would at least have witnessed the rise and fall of countless gods. The He continent was incredibly large. There were actually more secret realms and inaccessible areas than developed areas. It was far more likely that defeating such powerful existences would be impossible under normal circumstances. Most people would simply draw a dragon's head on a map and warn the unlucky ones who had to pass by to be careful. That was because if a dragon targeted them, it was likely that even a princess of a country would be treated as food on a platter. Nobody would even bother to save her. Fortunately, immemorial dragons and supreme immemorial dragons rarely appeared on the continent. They had subordinates who would hunt for food for them as long as they stayed in their dragon nest. They also had opponents at the same power level as them that restrained each other. From a certain standpoint, these dragons had their own territories and large numbers of citizens. They even had young dragons and night dragons that were loyal to them. These dragons were more like a country than an individual. Dragon City? Dragon City wouldn't be able to order around immemorial dragons. Dragons were a typical species that respected the strong. Molly, the dragon queen of the immemorial dragons, didn't even have many immemorial dragons at the same power level as her. When her husband was the dragon emperor, who barely reached the standard of an immemorial dragon, Dragon City did have several immemorial dragons that obeyed his commands. However, there were still no immemorial dragons at the same power level. As for supreme immemorial dragons, there seemed to be 2 in the entire red dragon species. However, both of them were viewed as existences akin to demon lords. Even when the entire red dragon species was exiled, no one had ever seen them do anything. Of course, some places definitely had immemorial dragons and supreme immemorial dragons, such as Dragon Island and Dragon World. However, don't expect them to listen to you. These prideful dragons wouldn't even allow their juniors to fly above their heads, nor would they listen to their juniors' commands. Of course, for ordinary mortals, it didn't matter if they encountered an immemorial dragon or an adult dragon. Either way, they would all die. Alright, now that things had reached this point, the conclusion had been reached. Little Red Dragon was at the immemorial dragon level, and she was a red dragon that mainly robbed others. Now that these 2 identities were revealed, even if Little Red's hidden identity as the Dragon Queen wasn't revealed, she would definitely be ranked on the Calamity rankings. And Little Red even told me her name, Varen's Calamity ein Mises. She was one of the few immemorial red dragons that had been active on the surface for a long time. Her combat achievements, fine, perhaps it could be considered a dark history. She had burned down several cities, caused small countries to disintegrate, kidnapped princesses for ransom, and even created a plot to destroy a country to steal the country's treasury. She was definitely an evil dragon, and one of the best of all evil dragons. From a certain standpoint, before that memorable adventure, Little Red had been a pure evil dragon in every sense of the word. And since she had outstanding combat talent and experience even among the powerful red dragons, it was easy to tell just by looking at how easily she had fought against her dragon queen mother, who had been through hundreds of battles. It wouldn't be wrong to treat her as an immemorial dragon. It was likely that as long as her reputation spread, she would definitely be ranked on the Calamity rankings. It would be difficult to say whether she would be ranked higher or lower than Roland. Although I don't know why the Undying Roland has such a high ranking on the Calamity rankings, just the fact that he's able to command that immemorial red dragon to do battle is already proof enough of how ridiculous he is. Have you heard? Those 2 immemorial red dragons are still in this city. Intelligent creatures were able to survive for so long because they would pass down their knowledge to others. At the very least, they would tell their descendants how to deal with threat. When a humanoid Calamity faction appeared by everyone's side, it would be quite obvious what they would do and how to deal with it. And so, Little Red enjoyed super VIP treatment. When she entered a bar, apart from alcohol, everything else would be paid for by the officials. Roland had told Samantha that a certain red dragon would go crazy if she wasn't a good drinker. Nobody dared to talk to her, and she didn't even need to pay to buy anything on the streets. It wasn't that Little Red didn't want to pay, but rather that the stall owner had already run off. This was especially so after Samantha and the others returned to the Forest of Dreams. Everyone else around Little Red would be afraid to talk to her, or even secretly look at her with fear. The only person she could talk to was Molly, the person she hated the most. For Little Red, not having to eat, sleep, and beat up Molly was already an improvement in her patience. Actually, even if there was a prohibition against drinking alcohol, Little Red would still go and steal alcohol based on her usual habit. But it just so happened that she had to keep an eye on this troublemaker that she had finally managed to catch. She couldn't feel at ease drinking alcohol, nor could she sleep. Naturally, her mood kept worsening. As for Molly, she truly hoped that Roland would come out as soon as possible. Over the past few days, she had accidentally angered her own daughter. Perhaps Little Red would simply vent her stress and dissatisfaction on Molly, which resulted in her being beaten up quite a few times. Of course, at least half of the beatings were due to Molly's own actions, such as running away, poisoning her, rebelling against her, and so on. After doing this a few times, Little Red directly drew a small pool of her blood every morning, making her so weak that she was unable to play any trick. If she was in a bad mood, Little Red would beat her up, making her feel like she was on the verge of death. Considering how Dragon Queen Molly killed off Little Red's father and her siblings' entire family when she became the Dragon Queen, she hunted down and tried to kill Little Red. From a certain standpoint, it really couldn't be said who was right and who was wrong. Even if Little Red directly killed off Molly, it would be perfectly justifiable. Even if Roland was here, he would probably only sigh about how chaotic the noble circle was. He wouldn't interfere, as this was someone else's or other dragon's family business. But at this moment, this other dragon family's business came to him. Have you made up your mind? You should know what this means, don't you? Indeed, half-blood dragon descendants aren't treated well by others. But do you think that with me and Roland around, anyone would dare to look down on our future baby? Baby? That's right, something was wrong with Little Red these past few days. Harloise had made it quite clear. Spring had arrived, the season for animals to reproduce. Relax, I'm not interested in bones at all. Although I like Roland quite a bit, my goal is to give birth to little dragons. Although I can reluctantly accept a half-blood dragon descendant, he won't even be able to give me that. I'm not a necrophile. 2 years ago, back in Sulphur Mountain City, in that bar, Eliza was worried that Little Red would be her rival in love and challenged her by saying, "I definitely won't lose." Little Red said this. And indeed, Eliza wasn't lying. She indeed had a good impression of Roland, but it was more of a familial friendship than anything else. It had nothing to do with love. She had always wanted a child of her own. From a certain standpoint, the foundational reason for Little Red's complete retirement from her identity as an evil dragon was her maternal instincts that became more and more prevalent as she grew older. As a famous evil dragon, not only did Little Red love and dearly as her own daughter, she would often transform into human form and play with other species' children in Sulphur Mountain City's small parks. She would act as an amiable black-haired big sister. This doubtlessly caused those who knew her to be astonished and in disbelief. In fact, Little Red even got into a conflict with a new holy knight because of this. Recently, Little Red's maternal instincts had become even more apparent as she stared at Samantha. She even tempted Samantha to become her second adopted daughter. Dragons were relatively independent creatures. They were quite stubborn about territory. Most dragons would live apart from each other even if they had offspring. It was mostly female dragons who refused to recognize other dragons. And it just so happened that female dragons were slightly stronger than male dragons. That was why it was also more common for female dragons to be the victors and merciless in fighting over the custody of their children. Female dragons believed that it was fine for them to have a family of their own without a husband, but they would definitely have a child. It would be even better if they had a nest of children. However, it wasn't so easy for an immemorial red dragon to have a child. In this world, the more powerful an existence's bloodline was, the more difficult it would be for them to have descendants. There were quite a few mixed blood dragons. It was just that dragons often went too overboard in certain areas. This was especially so for male dragons who were bullied by their own species' females. They could only vent their desires on the females of other species, causing the number of mixed blood dragons to increase exponentially. However, it would be quite difficult for a female immemorial red dragon to have descendant. First, she would need to find a male dragon with a bloodline similar in strength to hers. Then, she would need to do this many times in exchange for an incredibly low chance of success. This meant that she would need to stay together with this male for a considerable amount of time. At the very least, she couldn't dislike this male too much. This was something that Little Red couldn't do in the past. Little Red had always been chased by her own species. She was also a misophobe, and she loved cute little girls the most. By the time she became an immemorial dragon, she could only look for the few immemorial dragons that were few in number, or go look for powerful individuals from other powerful species. However, she just happened to look down on those vicious and foolish members of her own species. That was why she could only continue looking at other people's daughters while drooling. To sum it up, she was just like those leftover women who accidentally passed the age limit. The one that likes me is too pitiful to look at, and the one that I like doesn't have the corresponding ability. And so, as time passed, Little Red's resentment accumulated more and more, and she went even more overboard in certain areas. Actually, Little Red and Momo had quite a good relationship. From a certain standpoint, they both belonged to the Strange Aunties Alliance. It was just that one of them was obsessed with Lolas, while the other was obsessed with Shotas. Whenever the two of them privately discussed how to please, abduct, children, Sulphur Mountain City's citizens would report this to the police more than once or twice. All right then, from a certain standpoint, after Roland revived, Little Red discovered to her surprise that his bloodline actually changed. In fact, it even faintly seemed to be above her own immemorial red dragon bloodline. This meant that some trouble was destined to find Roland. Roland is currently undergoing a dragon bloodline conversion. After he successfully obtains the red dragon bloodline, the chances of him having descendants will be even higher. His future children will also become stronger and stronger. Even a mixed-blood dragon descendant can use a ritual to purify his bloodline and become a complete dragon. No, I can sense how powerful Roland's current bloodline is. In fact, our descendants might even surpass the true dragons. This was the reason why the stingy Little Red unhesitatingly sacrificed so much, even sacrificing as much of her own blood as possible. If it wasn't for the fact that her blood loss had already reached a fatal level, she wouldn't have wanted Molly to taint Roland's dragon bloodline at all. That's right, she used the word taint to describe her own mother's blood as a source of pollution. I should add that many dragon bloodline warlock families would have siblings or family members leave their descendants behind in order to inherit their abilities. It seemed that as long as anyone was related to dragons, it would be correct to say that their circle was truly chaotic, such as a certain beast tamer who was becoming more and more mystical. But faced with Little Red's agitation, Molly hesitated for a moment before finally deciding to continue speaking. I'm not talking about descendants. I'm saying that if you're together with that man, do you really like him? If you're together only for the sake of descendants, you'll definitely meet with misfortune in the future. Little Red paused in surprise for a moment upon hearing this. This didn't seem like something Molly would say. I've personally experienced it. Her voice became fainter and fainter as she recalled the madness and pain of her past. This red-haired woman, who had always seemed so domineering, showed a rare sign of weakness as she showed her weak side in front of her daughter. Little Red clenched her fists tightly. Molly actually dared to slander her father, whom she greatly admired, in order to find an excuse to lower her own disgust. Wasn't this just asking for a beating? It's true. There's no need for me to lie at such a time. Perhaps in your eyes, Ukdandi is a good father and a wise leader of the dragons. But in my eyes, he's just a bastard who forcefully took over my father's throne and forced me to give birth to his child." Seeing that Molly was showing signs of weakness, which was rare for her, Little Red thought back to the information she had obtained in the past. After hesitating for quite a while, she finally put down her fist. In the dragon's records, the wise Dragon City King Ukdandi defeated the previous generation's corrupt and greedy tyrant to become the Dragon City King. But, looking at it from the perspective of the previous generation's princess, Molly, Ukdandi was indeed a bastard who killed her own father and forced himself on her. As Ukdandi left, the past became untraceable. If one really had to say anything, one would probably only be able to use the phrase, "The noble circle is truly chaotic." Little Red fell into deep thought when faced with her mother's rare sincere warning. But after a while she chuckled. "You're misleading me. My situation is different from yours. There's no deep hatred between me and Roland. But there's also no love between the two of you. Do you really think that he'll agree? Aren't you afraid that the friendship between the two of you will be destroyed? He's probably one of the few friends you have in this world. Perhaps he's even your only confidant." Molly didn't care about Little Red at all. But what she said was correct. Back in the day, Little Red's relationship with Roland was exactly the same. Out of all the chaotic relationships between Little Red and Roland, Little Red's relationship with Roland was the best. Later, in Sulphur Mountain City, rather than saying that Little Red was Roland's prison guard, it was more accurate to say that she was Roland's good friend's companion in prison. He hasn't evolved enough emotional cells yet, so he doesn't even know what love is. Perfect, I don't need love either. Relax, if he doesn't agree, I've already made backup preparations. Little Red's face was filled with hesitation, but even more than that, she was resolved to make a sacrifice. Backup preparations? How could there be backup preparations for matters of the heart? Could it be that you? For some reason, Molly felt as if she had accidentally discovered something frightening. Yep, I should have listened to Momo's idea and drugged him. I specially prepared a special drug for dragons, which will make him % and yen hashtag and then I'll use yen hashtag at and asterisk on him. At any rate, it's fine as long as there's a future generation. After that, he'll just think that he had a wet dream and that it's even better that he doesn't know. Our relationship won't change. This is an aphrodisiac. This is a crime. Molly never imagined that there would be a day when she would want to stop a crime. But suddenly, the magical shackles that were restricting her suddenly tightened around her, making it impossible for her to get up. Molly had an expression of panic and didn't know what to do. She could sense that Roland had already come out, and Little Red was adjusting her clothes, intending to greet him. There seemed to be some abnormal liquid in the vial in her breast pocket. The former Dragon Queen was filled with anxiety. She believed that her daughter would really do anything for the sake of a child and a family of her own. Would the tragedy of the older generation repeat itself? But right after that, she heard Little Red's astonished shout. "Roland, weren't you evolving the dragon vein? Why did the dragon vein disappear? Why do I feel like you're so weak right now?"